And get started. Okay, great. All right. Hopefully folks on the phone can hear us and participate in a meaningful way. If there are technical difficulties, when I sent around the information, I also included my work cell phone number so that you can text me. And please do text me in a timely fashion so that we can make sure that we get that resolved if at all possible. Okay. Let's just start by going around the table and doing introductions. Also, if folks who are sitting in the public comment section would like to introduce themselves, that would be greatly appreciated. And I'll start with Mary Beth.
I'm Mary Beth, Group State Archivist.
Rob Levant, Association of Oregon Counties. Scott Winkles, League of Oregon Cities.
Mark Landauer here on behalf of the Special Districts Association of Oregon. Steve Sewell, I'm with the Oregonian Open Life.
Lee Vanderbilt, the Journal of Cincinnati West.
Les Seitz from American Enterprise.
Liz Craig with DAB.
I'm Michael Crum from the Attorney General's office.
And I am Ginger McCall, the Public Records Advocate. So I was hoping today, first,
In the back, or
oh
maybe
yeah, you know what,
maybe on
I'm
the
so
phone,
sorry.
too.
If we could start with the folks on the phone, if there is anyone on the phone line. Okay. If you are on the phone line and you're speaking, we can't hear you, so make sure you hit your unmute button. Feel free to chime in at any point.
This is Richa Podell with Representative Power's office. She's unable to join today, so I'm here.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, because I can't hear you?
Yeah, this is Richa Podell with Representative Power's office.
Anyone else on the phone? Okay. Go ahead to the public section of the room.
Cameron Miles with Legislative Council.
Ami Sender, DHS.
And King Kitchen.
I'm Emily Madison with the Governor's office.
I'm David Allen. I live in Newport, also serve on the City Council, and I'm here to watch the meeting.
All right, great. So I'm hoping in this meeting to make it a little bit more easy for the public to be involved in a real-time way, and to allow for more public comment and just create a more open meeting. So I think it would be useful if for each section of this agenda, we allow the public to comment. I don't foresee that there's a problem with public records law with that. If anyone thinks and has an objection that that would be a problem, I would be happy to hear your thoughts now. All right, great. So if members of the public do have comments at any point, feel free to step up to the table, and we'll make sure that you get heard. So first, updates from my office. I've been providing a lot of trainings lately. I've been all over the state. I did government trainings in Newport and McMinnville, Burns, Vail, Baker City, Pendleton, The Dalles, Bend, and Redmond. I have future trainings that are going to be held in Portland, Salem, and Lebanon. I also have started doing public trainings. I held a public training in Vail and one in Crooked River. I'm hoping to do future trainings in Salem and Portland as well. And it seems to me a lot of the feedback that I've been hearing are that there are specific issues with school boards and districts. So I'm hoping to reach out to school boards and districts specifically to do public records training there. I've also heard a fair number of complaints about elected officials and police departments, so I'm going to do specific outreach to those particular groups and tailor training specifically to their needs. On the deputy hiring front, we do have 6 candidates that we will be interviewing on August 2nd and August 8th. Hopefully, by the time that we have our next meeting, I will have a deputy in place. Mary Beth and Emily Madison are going to be assisting me in that. So far, I've had 22 requests for assistance of various sorts. Some of these are things which I would actually be able to mediate under the law, in so much as they're requests from individuals involving requests to state agencies. Some of them are things which I would probably not be able to mediate. A fair number of complaints about elected officials, school districts, cities, counties. So in those instances, I've been doing just informal dispute resolution. I find that I need to kind of tailor the model of assistance that I'm giving to the situation that I'm presented with. A lot of times I've had some success just giving the government body a call and telling them about my office and that I've received a complaint and having a conversation with them about the status of the request. In other instances, it was just a request for some sort of advice about how to make a public records request or how to make an argument for a fee reduction or waiver. So I've been doing a fair amount of just advising on those sorts of aspects of the law. Anecdotally, I've heard most of the disputes that I've received complaints about have been over exemptions or fee reductions or waivers. The fee reduction and waiver issue seems to be a particularly thorny issue. So I'm working, at this point I have pretty much all of those requests for assistance resolved, but I'm receiving new requests every day. Did you have a comment?
Questions?
Sure.
Couple questions. First of all, it sounds like you're doing a lot of traveling. That's super terrific and happy that you're doing that. Question is whether you have the budget to be able to maintain that type of activity. And then a comment, if I may. There are a number of annual conferences that take place whereby I think you could get a very large and interested audience. For example, the Oregon Chiefs of Police, the Oregon Police Chiefs, the Fire Chiefs, AOC, LOC, SDAO, school boards. There are a number of associations I think you ought to be thinking about reaching out to, whereby you can make yourself available to speak or do a presentation at those conferences, where thereby potentially getting a bigger bang for your travel buck.
Yeah, that's a good point. I am sensitive to the budgetary issues, which is why one of the measures that I put in place is that when I'm doing these travels, I'm going with the records retention folks. So we're sharing at least some of the costs as part of that travel. And I am planning on speaking at OAMR, that conference in September. And I did meet with the district attorneys when they were all meeting in Bend. But I think this is a good idea. And if you have specific organizations that you think I should get in touch with, if you could shoot me an email on that, I'd really appreciate it. See, that's what happens.
I'm trying to get out of here without any more.
My folks are usually at a lot of those conferences that you just mentioned. And so what we're going to try to do in the future is piggyback and get Ginger on those events as well.
I know that the LOC conference literally gets hundreds and hundreds of city officials and workers. Same with the special districts. I have little doubt that's true of the county, so on and so forth. So creating, because they are annual, I think that trying to get on those dance cards on an annual basis is a really good way to remind people about our public records statutes.
Yeah, that's a great idea, and a very efficient way to reach a large audience.
Sure. Also, if are you going to prepare a summary of sort of a summary of the general feedback? I know some of this probably not appropriate for that, but so we know, because we do a class called Elected Essentials for our newly elected officials, and if there's a deficient, if we're getting a lot of the same things, we want to adjust our public records curriculum in that training too. So I'd like to see sort of a general idea, just a sort of general summary of what types of concerns or complaints you're hearing back from folks.
Yeah, I can prepare something like that for the next meeting.
Should probably acknowledge our guest as well.
Yes, we have an additional member who has showed up. Would you mind introducing yourself?
Hi, I'm Kim Thatcher. I'm my first in-person meeting here, so I represent Senate District 13.
Okay, so prepare a summary of the feedback that I'm receiving at the meet and greets and at the training.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we need like a detailed report, but just a general summary would be helpful.
Yeah, I can do a presentation on that ahead of time. Let's see. So additionally, I have volunteered to do a research project related to the Sunshine Committee. There's been a question before that committee. This came out initially as an issue that was brought to the governor's office regarding exemptions related to government employees' personal information, addresses, contact information. And the governor's office had initially recommended that there be a work group put together, but there were some objections to that idea and some suggestions that perhaps this would be more appropriately considered by either the Sunshine Committee or by my office. So we collaborated and decided that a good way to go forward would be for my office to conduct some research on this question and to prepare a report and then to submit it to the Sunshine Committee for the Sunshine Committee's consideration. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, I think that's right.
So, go ahead.
No, I was gonna ask you about something else, so if you wanna say more about that, you should do it.
Sure.
Is there somebody considering where that line is between personal information? Because I held a few years back when concealed handgun licenses as a list were being requested by different entities. I was thinking we need to differentiate between activities of government and then personal information. So is there somebody looking at that?
I know the Sunshine Committee is looking at that broadly. I think it's a really important question, and it's something that I spoke on a bit off the cuff at the last Sunshine Committee meeting. I don't know if that'll be included necessarily in this research project, but perhaps that would be an additional project that I could do in the future. I think we're trying to keep it fairly finite because we wanted a fairly quick turnaround on this so that we can move it to the Sunshine Committee and then they can make a consideration. But I think that broader question of what is personal information versus government information is a really useful question.
So specifically, Senator Thatcher, we're talking in the Sunshine Committee about exemptions for addresses, but it is gonna be a little bit broader. Starting at the next meeting, we're gonna be taking public testimony on things like dates of birth and other similar categories of information. I think the discussion in the Sunshine Committee last time suggested pretty strong feelings and legitimate points on both sides and the need to get a good rule that hopefully will work for everyone. But I would say you should come to the next Sunshine Committee meeting if it's a subject you're interested in.
It's always interesting.
But I was gonna ask you about
Sure.
how because you gave us a little bit of, update that you're doing some informal dispute resolution, but I'm very curious how that's going. Or how you generally say it's going.
I think it's going fairly well. There are instances where I can't get the requester everything that they want. Most of the requests for assistance that I've received have been from the requester side. I receive requests from government entities, just questions about the public records law, but usually not a request to do any kind of intercession with a requester. So there are instances, of course, where I can't get the requester everything that they're hoping for. There are instances where perhaps they don't have a strong legal argument in favor of a fee waiver or reduction. And the best that I can do there is to reach out to the agency and to try to have a conversation with them about that. But, I can't necessarily get everyone the outcome that they want. But I think in most instances, the outcomes that I've received have been a fairly positive outcome. So, if I'm working with a reporter, for instance, and they have a question about an exemption, oftentimes I'll assist them in crafting an argument around that exemption. Or if they have a question about fee waiver or fee reduction, I'll talk to them about what the best arguments they can make for that are. So those tend to go fairly well. I found that most government entities are fairly responsive to me. In my initial email is, hello, I was appointed by Governor Brown to serve in this position. Here's a link to my website if you want to read more about what I do. I've received a complaint about X public records issue, and I'd like to have a further conversation with you about it. And I've had pretty good luck with people actually calling me back.
I had a related question for a fellow council member. So have you seen any difference in the number or type of appeals you're getting as a consequence of this alternative process?
It's hard I don't have any data to suggest causation, but I was actually just thinking the other day that I feel like I'm getting fewer petitions. I suspect it's coincidence, but I don't know.
I hope I'm not
Well, not that hasn't happening this year at all.
They tend to be cyclical, honestly. Like they tend to come in floods and droughts, so I think it's way too early to So,
Let's see, so meet and greet with other public outreach. I've done a fair number of meetings with groups in the public, especially the news media. I met with the Oregon Society of Professional Journalists. I met with the Bend Bulletin, folks at the Oregonian, and a variety of other Portland news media that showed up at a meeting that I had there. And I've been doing, as I said, public training, and I wrapped up my meet and greet. I think I had a total of about 5 or 6 meet and greets, including one online session that people could attend remotely. And I did find a lot of the feedback that I got there to be very useful. It gave me a better sense of what sorts of perennial issues I was seeing under the law, or I would be seeing under the law. So other than that, in exciting personal news, which I hope won't affect things too much professionally, my partner and I are expecting a baby next year, in January. I anticipate that I'll be out for about 4 to 6 weeks, but by then I'll have a deputy in place who should be able to cover things.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Let's see, so I would love to have your feedback on any of these things. If anyone has in particular possible avenues of research or inquiry for that research project that I'll be doing for the Sunshine Committee, I would love to hear your thoughts on that. Or thoughts on how I can be more effective at training mediation dispute resolution.
So I'm just curious, as you've done these trainings and you've heard the issues, and as you dive deeper into the Oregon law, are there areas that you're finding need to be tuned up, or given your experience, you're looking at saying, we can do better?
I think there are definitely areas under the law that could be clearer. There are some potential long-term legislative changes that I think would be helpful. I don't know that we have time to necessarily get them in before next year's legislative session, but I think that as a longer-term project, it would potentially be helpful to deal with some issues related to fees, especially fee waivers and reductions, some issues related to the deadlines under the statute, just the sort of, perennial public record problem. So, and I would be happy to hear people's feedback on what they think we should be proposing legislatively, because this is really what this council is for, is to make legislative and policy proposals that will improve transparency in the state. And we do have a section under here where we can talk a little bit more if people do have ideas for legislative concepts. Steve, did you have a comment? I'm sorry, I thought you had your hand.
Oh, no, I'm just rubbing my hands.
I did actually earlier. You mentioned in your update that you were assisting people with crafting legal arguments.
Crafting arguments for how they might get a fee waiver or reduction.
Yeah.
Approaching how to make a good argument for public interest under an exemption.
Curious if any government entity has asked similar questions as to whether or not they're looking at, have you had any questions from government about public interest and the balance there?
I have had questions from government about fee reductions and fee waivers, not so much about exemptions at this point. I have had questions about some of the deadlines in the statute and how to interpret that. The fee waivers and reductions, that seems to be the issue that I'm hearing most from government bodies about.
And what sort of questions do you
have? Whether or not someone should qualify for a fee waiver reduction, what the sorts of standards are. On the deadlines, it was when does the timeline start running under the statutory deadline. I'm trying to think of some of the other questions that I've received. I think those are the primary ones.
I think it would be helpful, if I may, to have an accounting, if you will, of the types of questions that you're getting. Because that may be instructive in future discussions as well.
Yeah, I can definitely do that. I have a spreadsheet where I keep track of the requests for assistance that I receive. I can give you the portion of that spreadsheet. I probably wouldn't give out names necessarily.
No, I wouldn't ask
But
that
I
you
could
do
definitely
so, but
give you the portion of the
yeah.
spreadsheet that deals
I
with
mean,
what the issue was.
what's the type of request, or who's the requester, who's asking the question, government, public, private, citizen? I mean, just that sort of raw data, I think might be helpful
Yeah.
to us over time.
Yeah, I think that is helpful. So, and that's also something that I've been tracking just for the purpose of, justifying my existence in the legislature.
Indeed.
So, right, I mean, you have metrics.
And I suppose you end up scribbling down various outcomes of those inquiries as well.
I do, yeah. The spreadsheet tracks who made their request for assistance, what organization they're affiliated with, either governmental or non-governmental, what the date was that I received it, when I completed it, what the issue was, what steps I took, and then what the ultimate outcome was. So, and this is something that I also could potentially make publicly available and plan to make publicly available on my website.
Just by eliminating the column, like at the bottom of the person.
Yeah.
So you have de-identified data.
Yes, exactly. Anecdotally, most of the requests for assistance I've received have been from reporters. I think that there's just a little bit of, there's not enough information out there yet. People don't know about my office necessarily if they're just members of the public, which is where that public outreach piece comes in. And someone had suggested last time, in fact, I think it was you had suggested that I perhaps do some op-eds in newspapers, and that's definitely something that's very high up on my to-do list. I'm hoping once I get the deputy in place, I'll have more time freed up to do those sorts of things.
Is there, are you expecting the deputy to be in place at any particular time at this point, or is that still?
I'm hoping by the end of August. So, but we'll see. I mean, it kind of depends on that person's time as well.
On the research for the sun, sorry.
Oh, did you already say that you selected someone?
Oh, no, we have candidates,
Okay.
6 candidates for what we're doing interviews with over the course of this weekend, next week.
Got it.
On the research for the Sunshine Committee, you might have already said this, but what was the timeline? Were you planning on presenting the research at the next committee meeting, or do you know yet?
I think it was the one after, because the next committee meeting is September, right?
The next committee meeting is September, and I think you had said you would give it to me enough in advance of the November meeting that I could.
Okay, I did not commit to September. That would be, I don't like to overcommit to things I can't deliver. So I think November is a more realistic timeline. Thank you. So, and like I said, I will provide it to you beforehand. So we can.
So we're not reading it at my meeting, or?
Yeah, that would be unfortunate.
Unfortunate indeed.
And if anyone wants to assist in that research project or has any ideas for it, I would be very happy to hear them. I would be happy to have any assistance that anyone can offer. And I know there were a few additional members of the public who showed up after the beginning of the meeting, but if you are a member of the public and you would like to comment at any point, do feel free to step up to the table. I want people to feel like this is an inclusive conversation. Sure, go ahead.
Just for clarification.
Oh, would you mind introducing yourself?
I'm sorry, I'm Sunny Sanchez. I'm a resident of Benton County. And my question is, what is the timeline for an agency to respond to a TRR?
So an agency has 5 business days to give an acknowledgement, and then it has 10 additional business days beyond that, so 15 business days total to respond, or at least to provide an estimated date of completion.
Provided certain circumstances exist.
The certain circumstances.
Whether the question or the request is specific enough to be able to respond to, whether the request would have a $25 or more charge to it, and thereby the governmental entity asking the requester if they are willing to pay it, the clock stops. I mean,
Yeah, so in that
there are conditions upon which that timeline applies. So I just want to be, just the 5 and 10 isn't a full picture.
Those are
But
the general
those are
deadlines.
the general guidelines.
When an agency reaches out to a person with a request for clarification or with a fee estimate, and they're waiting for a response back from the requester, that tolls the deadline. So the deadline clock stops until the requester replies.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else, thoughts or comments? All right, great. We will move on to the next section of the meeting, which actually we have, I don't think we need a break quite yet. Do people feel like we need a break? All right.
I just want to mention, before you get on to the other subject, I'm thinking about the agency requesting information from the person requesting the record, and that stops the clock. In other instances, I've noticed where an agency will kind of abuse that. Maybe not in public records. I'm just wondering if is there somebody kind of keeping an eye on that?
That is an issue that I have recently been hearing about. It's a potential avenue for legislative reform to put some kind of limit on how long the clock can be stopped. It's something that, proposals that I have heard from others in the requester community.
Yeah, I could get drug out for a really long time
Yeah.
just to try to stall somebody.
Yeah, no, I think that is a very real concern for requesters.
I feel like we put a good faith requirement in there.
There is a good faith requirement.
So, yeah.
I appreciate, there may be some abuse that takes place, and I don't know how you enforce it. There may have to be some type of an enforcement or overview, but I genuinely have to, from my experience, people are not trying to game the system.
Maybe not generally, no.
Yeah, I have no patience for people who are abusing the system.
Well, I just want to make sure there's an outlet for, the requester that's been sitting there and been asked questions to death in order, where it feels like, to a point where, can they go to you, or what's the recourse?
Yeah, they can definitely come to me. In that instance, I would be happy to hear from them if they have a complaint about something like that occurring, and I would be happy to take it to the agency and have that conversation with the agency.
I have some legislative suggestions, but I'll wait until that's on the agenda.
But yeah, I think that's actually an instance potentially, Senator, where the informal or formal dispute resolution would be a really good mechanism to deal with that particular problem. Whereas it might be difficult to get a district attorney or someone from the Attorney General's office to really be able to manage that sort of issue. It's something that I think dispute resolution would be very helpful for. There was a comment.
Yeah, just for the record, David Allen. I have a question and follow-up to that. So are the concerns you're hearing from requesters related primarily to state agencies, or are you hearing it also with respect to cities, counties, special districts, and the other categories? Because I think that's an important difference, because a lot of, the background I have is with local government. I'm just curious what the differences you're observing based on your recent experience.
I would say that the larger percentage of the requests for assistance I'm receiving are related to local governments, especially elected officials. My suspicion is that what's going on there is that elected officials in local governments, they were formerly members of the public. They don't necessarily think of themselves as government bureaucrats, so they're not as aware of their responsibilities under the public records law, which is one place where I'm hoping to be able to make a difference with the public records training. And I am hoping to both reach out to some of those entities with an in-person training, but also to put together a brief module training that can be given to them as part of their onboarding. But I would say the larger number of the requests for assistance I've received are related to local elected officials.
Let's follow up. In follow-up to what Scott Winkle said, so I'm also involved with the League of Working Cities. The conference, as you may know, is in Eugene in late September 27th to 29th. I think is the date, Scott.
Yeah, the last week of September into October.
Just for purposes of disclosure, I serve on the board of the League of Working Cities. We already have our panelists set up for the panels and breakout rooms, but there is a section in which state agency representatives, both state and federal, are there for meet and greets. And I really think your presence there at a table with information along with the other state agencies, you'd have a very large audience to interact with. I mean, all the elected officials and appointed officials, that's the conference annually, and I think that would be a nice opportunity to get to know some of the folks, especially elected officials.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Just to add, AOC has the same meet and greet in its annual conference in November. So, AOC, Association of Orange County. So if you find that
GAO is February.
So if you find that David's suggestion works and it works well at LFC, come to AOC too.
That's November in Eugene, right, Rob?
Yeah, you, Secretary of State, you should have gotten a night for ours.
And that's in November, you said?
We're September.
Okay.
We're November.
Okay.
I'll send you the invite.
Yeah,
I'll
I'd
send
be
you
very
directly
happy to
too.
see that, thank you.
It's a good venue for that.
Thank you.
Happy to, and I'm very pleased you're going to Three-Quarters the following week, or the previous week.
Yeah, the end of September is getting a little crowded, because there's also, the Ombuds Association conference that's up in Portland, just on those weeks later. So hopefully I can come in.
I had another thought. The Oregon Government Ethics Commission requires regular disclosure from elected officials,
Economic interest.
yeah, guys of all levels of government in Oregon. And is there some sort of orientation that goes on for that, on ethics and compliance and things like that?
OGEC has their own training schedule. We include that in our elected essentials course. And then we also, OGEC coordinates with the city recorder to make sure that those filings take place. Ethics is also another really broad, multi-hour training. How much attention you would get by combining it with the public records law, I don't know.
Yeah.
But
I was just thinking you'd have the people in the same spot.
we try to combine it all with our elected essentials class, which is like I think it's a 12-hour total.
So we do a new commissioner orientation.
Mm-hmm.
I have about an hour and a half of their time, and I give them, here's how to stay out of trouble when you're sworn in 2 months. And ethics is one of them. Public records, public meetings, just the basics that, to avoid trouble. So they get it kind of down and dirty and quick, 2 months before they're sworn in. But it's not like the comprehensive stuff that Scott's talking about, which OCAP is pretty good about going around and giving trainings.
We do the same. We have plenty of in-person training, online materials, but for economic interest statements, I only think that port commissioners amongst the special districts are required to file.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think we got a broader exception.
Any other thoughts, comments on this section? Okay, great. So we'll bump the break to after the next section, because we're running a little bit early. I did promise you that we would shorten these meetings if at all possible, so the meeting will be as short as it can be. We won't take up any extra time. So the next thing that we have on the agenda is a discussion of the DAS fee schedule. I had distributed the schedule to you. I also have it. There are a lot of handouts over there, so if you don't have the handouts, please feel free to take some. Many trees died in preparation for this meeting, make your desk worthwhile. So first, I gave a copy of the statewide policy. I sent that out via email. And then I also distributed to you this morning, we had some comments from the Oregon Society of Professional Journalists. And I see that Nick is here. So Nick, if you'd like to go ahead and present your comments, that would be great.
Great, thank you.
So just some background real quick on this before we get started. Liz, do you actually want to give the background? Because you're probably more qualified than I am to talk about the entire.
You know, there is quite a background, and when this came about, I wasn't with staff, but I guess I'm fortunate that I was on the work group that helped develop some of the new policies that we put in place. And so if we go back to 2015, when Secretary of State did their audit on records management within the state, a governor's executive order came out following that audit, directing DAS to carry out all of the recommendations that were in the Secretary of State audit. And so we did a number of things. We established a project team, and we first worked on a records management policy. That policy covers everything within records management, from ownership and access to retention, to training, to how to deal with electronic records, text messages, et cetera. And that was adopted as a statewide policy, and all agencies were required to adopt an internal policy based on that policy and file it with the Secretary of State's office. So the second piece of work was to then look at the fee structure, or lack thereof, across the enterprise of the executive branch of state government. And what the group found was that there were a lot of variations in how agencies were charging, when they were charging, what they were charging, and it resulted in a lot of inconsistency. And so the goal really was to limit those variations in fees, and also to establish some sort of methodology for evaluating requests for fee reductions or fee waivers. And the group, it was a separate group that looked at the fee structure. So we took the representatives from the 9 agencies that the Secretary of State's office audited, plus about, I think, 8 others who, for different reasons, have some complexities with records and records management within their agencies. We looked at those agencies and kind of plotted out what everyone is currently doing in terms of if they were waiving, what they were charging for staff time, what they were charging for copies, pages, et cetera. And tried to come up with something that was an average of all of that, and something that we thought would be fair and result in consistent charging. The intent of the fee schedule was never that agencies would need to increase their fees in order to meet the new fee schedule. The schedule was always intended to be a ceiling, and that agencies were free to charge less than the established fee structure. And I think that's an important point going into this conversation. The policy that we adopted was actually adopted, a year and a half ago. And we have been, the intent was always to put it through formal rulemaking. And we recognize that this would be a good forum for additional comments on the fee policy, and so that's why we are here today to talk about it. So hopefully that provides some context. And there was a lot of background work that went into the policy that you're looking at today. Did you have a question?
Kind of my village council. There's also FAQs that the DAS put out. They're very informative and go far beyond this document, informing you what is actually intended in some of these.
Yes.
Like the fee structure, you can't use someone, you can't hire an attorney to make copies, kind of thing that is discussed a lot more detail about how costs are limited. It's not visible in the document.
That's true, and that's a good point, that the fee structure, both the standardized fee structure and the reduced fee structure, we made it, I hope, clear that agencies could not charge based on who was doing the work. They have to charge based on the work that's being done. So if we have the director of an agency, and it's just a ridiculous example, who is, for whatever reason, going through and redacting information, we would not charge that director's salary. We would charge at the clerical rate, because that's really a clerical duty. And so, to your point, Cameron.
So did I hear you right, that the policy's been in place for 18 months?
It has been in place as a statewide policy. However, the jury's out on whether agencies have implemented it or adopted it as an internal policy, because we have been waiting to go through the formal rulemaking process so that they can just simply refer to the rule and not have to make changes to a policy anytime there might be a change to the structure.
Have you had any material response from agencies suggesting either a strengthening or weakening of the draft policy?
So my understanding was when DAS implemented this policy back in February, we put in place a 90-day window. And so we asked agencies to use the new fee structure for 90 days to log the requests and log the fee waiver requests that they were getting, to log everything basically about the requests based on the new fee structure. I had a chance to talk to the project manager who was in charge of this back then. She's moved on from DAS now, but I talked to her yesterday, and she said that in that 90-day window, we really only received comments from one agency. It was a very specific nuance to their agency, and we were able to provide some guidance around their concerns. So it was somewhat moot, I guess. There was a lot of discussion from agencies when we were developing it that, some feared that people might take advantage of the new structure. A lot of people honestly didn't like that you could waive the first 30 minutes, because if you have a routine request that takes less than 30 minutes, they felt like they were just going to be doing that all day long. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but my understanding is there wasn't any subsequent comments from agencies on the new structure and the new policy.
So what DAS is hoping for from us here is that we'll review the policy and give some feedback and propose some revisions, and then you'll take it to public comment, right?
Yes, the rulemaking process will allow for the public comment, yes.
So we did receive some comments from Mr. Nikodnik from the Oregon Society of Professional Journalists. So if you'd like to go ahead and just summarize your comments for us, that would be great.
Great. Thanks very much for having me here at the table. I want to thank Liz for doing such a great job presenting the work here. If anything, you undersold the work that went into it. I'm aware that it's a tremendous amount of work, and I commend you for tackling this as you have. We had some specific suggestions based on various kind of experiences we've had in the past and just looking at other laws in other states, and you all have them in written form, but basically we're just, first we just want to say we're really happy that the Public Records Advisory Council, that you all are here to look at this. The Attorney General's Records Task Force that many of you were part of, Scott, Rob, and Mark, and Les, and Michael all did hard work, and I think the understanding was that fees would be addressed at a later date. Well, I think this is a great start, and we do feel like there are opportunities for improvement, and that actually can help save the government time and money, believe it or not. Liz talked about the intent was not to have fees be increased. I spoke with one manager last year who said, well, now that we have this policy, I have to charge you. And our concern is that agencies will look at this as a mandated thing, and that routine requests that were turned over in the past will no longer be routine and will no longer be free, and will add a layer of bureaucracy to the process. We feel like this policy could have language that discourages that. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure exactly how, but if you guys know that if we come up with something, we think that this policy makes an effort to cap allowable fees, which is a good first step. I think more could be done in terms of, in the past, agencies have, in particular, legal fees can be used in a way that adds to cost, and we feel like there's got to be some sort of cap that has an agency actually having skin in the game, in that if they're over-lawyering, over-applying legal fees, then, well, that's, that shouldn't be 100% compensated by the requester, if that makes sense. That you could cap that at a rate of perhaps a lower level attorney. I've had an agency try to charge me $350 an hour for legal review costs because they hired Miller Nash to review every page of records that are routinely released without any legal review whatsoever overnight by other agencies that they happen to see an opportunity there to discourage release of records. So we have some of those ideas in here. We also feel like the hourly rates that were discovered by the Secretary of State audit in 2015 range from $15 to $40 an hour. In our effort to standardize, even the reduced fee rates are now up to $20 to $75 an hour, which is, obviously reality-based, but I feel like if you're setting the public interest, public service fee waiver floor at 20%, then, potentially that is more than obscured by the escalation of fees in other areas, and that a fee waiver of 50% or more would more fully serve the law's intent. FOIA, when it grants waivers, tends to do 100%. We're not saying that should occur in every instance. Other states also have similar things, but even a 50% floor would give a state latitude to apply waiver levels. And actually, I've had agencies say, when I've worked hard to narrow requests, I've said, what, take it for free. Our cost estimate is gone. We also make some specific suggestions for this cost estimate. If it's a line item estimate, that allows reporters to engage in and requesters in narrowing fee requests in a way that's cost efficient, save the government money. So that's the goal. I apologize for being long-winded. Thank you for listening.
Can you provide a little more detail on number 3 on discouraging the fee hikes? Just because the way that I read this, if it's sure to result in fees being charged for simple or routine requests, my sense is that it's the opposite, because we have the 30-minute waiver, and that, to me, a simple routine request would take less than 30 minutes, so I wouldn't be charging for that, ever. So to me, that's a little bit contrary to that point, but maybe I'm not understanding.
I guess I've seen, requests that were maybe more like 40-minute requests that we were not charged for. Agencies do, some agencies, through their own discretion, choose to apply fee waivers, I guess, informally on requests, and I just feel like, I think that's a great step that you've taken, and I think it does a public service. I feel like that still doesn't fully counter the opposite effect of agencies saying, well, it's 31 minutes, boom, there's the fee. And, it's not just the fee involved, it's the bureaucracy involved in the fee that tends to discourage public access. And, the reality is a lot of requesters there are real issues with records requests, and that's one of the reasons why we're so happy that you guys are here, is to promote a constructive engagement that can make this process more efficient. But anyway, I feel like this is an area where this policy can be improved.
As someone who was involved in the early part anyway of making this document before it went to what was, at least at the time, the enterprise leadership team, I know as well as you do that it was always intended as a the ceiling for what the charges could be. But I also recall getting the sense on seeing the document later in the process that even though I think everyone working on it had that understanding, I wasn't sure that we translated it very well into the actual document.
I agree.
And so I think one of my suggestions would be even just saying clearly up front that nothing in the policy is intended to require or even encourage agencies to charge for requests they would otherwise not have charged for would be a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was gonna say during the when you write it for rule making language, you can clean up a lot of that, because that's, when I read this, and that's just kind of how agencies read it, is that this is the law, this is what you're supposed to do, this is the big, comes down from that, this is what everybody's supposed to do. I also agree with Nick that, a lot of it is if you actually carry on a dialogue with your requester, you can get what you need. We just recently had a requester that asked for everything we had on the Rajneeshis. Well, that's, 90 cubic feet of boxes with 5,000 sheets of paper in each box.
And what would you have charged for that?
Yeah, and he wanted a fee waiver and wanted to know how long it was gonna take, to get that stuff to him. Well, when we called him and, oh no, I really don't want that. If you can just get me this stuff, I'll be very happy. And then we informed him, and oh yeah, that's doable. But I mean, a lot of it is that dialogue, and I think that's what needs to be implied here very strongly, is that you need to work with your requester to come to, and then these are just these are the absolute maximums that you can do, and through the rulemaking process, that's what you're going to need to be really strong in your language to say that, so that it's clear. Because right now, this makes it almost sound like this is mandatory, this is what you have to do, so an agency that's not charging that is going to charge that.
Right, I agree.
Well, it seems to me the way you deal with that is just make an explicit statement that agencies have the discretion to not charge for whatever reason. But if they do intend to charge, this is the cap. I mean, it's the same thing with the application for exemptions. Agencies often view those as mandates when, of course, they're discretionary. So I think rather than doing a reverse, this is your cap, I think making it more explicit that they have the discretion, except for the statutory requirements like transportation of the highway fund can only be, you can't waive the cost for.
Oh, yeah, and I think there's some curves.
Yeah,
there's some that are very specific. But yeah, I agree that the language could be made much more clear and stronger, that there is discretion and that this is a cap for a season. So we can work on that for sure.
So what you're saying, tell people they have the discretion to charge, as opposed to not to charge. I mean, it's not essential to charge people.
well, that's the point. I'm not being very articulate, that imposing fees is a discretion of the agency, imposing any fee. And then if you are going to impose a fee, then here are the guidelines. So it's sort of you go through the discretion door first before you apply the fees.
You had a comment back there?
Yeah, sorry, I just had a quick question. So what's your timing as far as getting an actual rule in place and adopted that will basically supersede and replace this policy that you currently have in effect?
Well, we wanted to start the rulemaking by fall,
Okay.
and so that's somewhat broad. Yes.
One suggestion, if the policy is still going to be in place for the time being until you get a rule adopted, I would probably, because I looked at this online, I'd probably have some language either on your website or associated with this document saying this policy is under review for possible rulemaking, and it might be adjusted once that rule is adopted. So at least folks understand this is a policy, but there's going to be something more finalized, and kind of that lets folks know this isn't final, a done deal. This is basically just the first step in the process. I think that's probably good for transparency purposes and also for the agencies. And I know there's probably local governments like cities and others that probably are looking at this and, ask themselves what use or how useful can this be for us?
Sure, yeah, that's a good suggestion.
Yeah, they definitely are. I mean, I know in my trainings that I hear that from the local government.
Yeah.
I really like Mary Beth's comment about making it explicit in here that fees, the fee estimate, that conversation is an opportunity to work with the requester to narrow, which is something that I try to emphasize in my training. Also, just as a point of comparison, in the federal FOIA, news media requesters never have to pay search or review costs. There are three favored categories of requesters. It's news media, educational requesters, and non-commercial scientific institutions. Never have to pay search and review costs. They only pay duplication costs.
Okay.
And that has worked out fairly well. I mean, there are many problems with the federal FOIA, but that is not one of them. I think that's actually one of the things that works great. And then above and beyond that, there's the fee waiver, which is a more difficult threshold to meet. And that waives the additional, the rest of the fee is the duplication cost, which back in the 90s could have been substantial. Now it's much less because you just get things on the CD and it's $5. But that presumption, when you're dealing with news media, that they should receive a substantial reduction, I think, first of all, would save a lot of time. It's not unprecedented, and it's done in the FOIA and I think in several states. And it would really serve the interests of the statute.
I honestly think it's done by, I think it's done by most state agencies too. But one of the other comments I had about this actually is I feel like we didn't really provide much guidance on how to decide between waiving the fees entirely or providing the reduced fee schedule. And that might be a way of getting at the same idea, like there's maybe some overlap between those two.
Yeah, and I also do agree with Nick's comments about the fee reduction, that 20% reduction not being quite enough, and maybe we should clarify that to make it something that's more substantial, especially if you're dealing with a news media requester.
So the public records manual says 25% is guidance, right, Michael?
Not real, I wouldn't treat that as guidance unless, I think there's a line there that says.
I get that right.
Can I quote you on that? You should, Lord. Let's just say it has evolved over time. And now I believe it is phrased simply as a neutral statement of fact, which is to say that there are a number of orders that have concluded that a waiver of 25% was reasonable. And as a statement of fact, I stand by it completely.
Just a couple of quick comments. One, just my own personal practice, not written down, but since really the early 90s, I haven't charged for a public records request, response, for filling it out, unless it's an hour. I always use an hour, because I figure if it takes me less than an hour, it's more of a waste of everybody's time for me to charge.
Yeah.
So I just informally done that. I found an hour to be cleaner than a half hour, but I just throw that out. The second thing is I understand the FOIA thing with the news media, and I don't philosophically object to it, but in the modern day and age, it's really hard to define who's media and who's not. Anybody can set up a blog web page and claim to be media, and then all of a sudden they're entitled to what? I know what traditional media looks like. It looks like Steve.
Accredited member of the press.
Well, but how did you?
There's been substantial litigation on that in the federal courts, that question of who is news media for the purposes of FOIA. So I think we could get meaningful guidance.
Are there clean lines? You know?
Well, I think, hasn't Congress added language to sharpen the definition?
Yeah, Congress did add language. Most of the agency regulations have language. I mean, a blogger with a following would probably qualify and should qualify because, I mean, the new media is not.
Sure.
I mean, the new media is online media. I mean, I think of several substantial publications online. I mean, who really subscribes in paper to The Atlantic, right? Does Slate.com even have a publication that's in paper? A lot of these publications don't, but they have a substantial following. So I think being electronic media shouldn't necessarily roll one out, which is maybe something that we could clarify too. I mean, I think all of these points could definitely be dealt with and clarified within the fee structure.
And I feel like the point of defining news media more finely is also something that can be addressed if it actually becomes a problem. I mean, right now, the issue that I think is most pressing is that we have here in the public interest threshold evaluation form language that says straight up, the fact that a topic has been discussed in the media does not automatically mean that there's a public interest in disclosing the information that's been requested about it. That to me runs a little bit counter to, the substantial case law in Oregon that lays down that media does in fact have a public interest. And I think some of the evaluation form is maybe on a little bit of a slippery slope in that way. Back when this came out in the fall of 2017 to stakeholders, I was the designee for SPJ, and they didn't comment to that effect. And there was discussion then about whether there should be a legal review to look more closely at case law and the public interest test and marry it to these forms. Shortly after that, this council was convened, and then there was discussion about whether some of these processes would be kicked to this group. And I think there may be some other things from that stakeholder process that were left in limbo in that way. But this was a discussion at that time, as was whether we would handle the public testimony piece of it. Yeah, my only other comment on this that I just want to throw out is back then there was a document, it's called the 2017-2019 price list. I don't see it today, but at that time it was attached to the same policy, and that's a good document. And yeah, I'd like to see it, stay in this. It was a very clear description of actual costs for producing public records for requesters and responders, and it was very detailed. Yeah, quite useful. We still have it on the website, but it's close to the policy. Oh, right. It lists what the current price agreement is for paper, so that's how much we should be charging for copies, and for media, the CDs, whatnot. Yeah, so it's still there. I haven't looked at it in a while, but.
So I wanted to speak to the issue of the public interest test for fee waivers.
Well, before we leave this topic, may I ask that? So I don't want to lose sight of this idea of a media exemption for review. So two questions. Number one, Liz, is this policy flexible enough that could be added? And my next question would be, would a sense of this council formally to recommend that addition, because that's a pretty material change to this policy, would that be helpful?
I don't think that anything's necessarily off the table. I think that's why we wanted this group to weigh in. And yes, I think that if there was a formal recommendation from this body, it would be more helpful in actually making.
So actually, I was going to speak just to that point.
Oh.
I think the addition of standardized fees is helpful. I think it can be worked out in a way so that it's messaged to the agencies that this is optional. But when it comes to the public interest test that's established, there's 3 or 4 pages of explanation to agencies of how they evaluate whether a request is in public interest. I think it's really very confusing, to be honest. There's a list of 8 yes or no questions, but they're really complicated questions. Like, would these requests for information advance the welfare or well-being of the general public? I mean, that's just give a thought. So it seems like maybe it's more objective and you just fill out this form, but I think it adds some complexity to the process. And what I like about the federal process is it takes a lot of that discretion out of it. The federal law creates 3 classes of requesters: commercial, news media, or educational institutions, or scientific research institutions, and then everybody else. And you can sorting out whether somebody belongs to one of those classes is probably the biggest part of the question, I would guess, the analysis. But beyond that, once they fall into that category, then you have a very specific prescription about fees. And for news media, for example, the fees would be only reproduction costs, photocopies. For commercial interests, you could recoup all kinds of labor costs. And for the ordinary requester,
it would be search and duplication costs. Ordinary requesters under the federal law are not charged for review.
Right.
Only commercial requesters.
But there's also a public interest test that could apply to them that might be more along the lines of.
The fee waiver. So there are 2 steps to the federal test. The first is whether you fall, which category of requester you fall into, and then additionally the fee waiver. The fee waiver is a higher standard to meet that just gets rid of all of the fees.
I would strongly support substituting that in full for the section on fee waivers. I think this law has been around this part of the law, as I understand, has been around for about 30 years or so, and it's worked effectively. I think it simplifies the process for agencies, and it probably takes care of a large portion of the friction currently exists.
Yeah. I will say anecdotally that most of the requests for assistance and questions in training that I've received have been around this particular topic. And I am particularly concerned because I've heard several iterations of the same question, which is, well, aren't news media requesters commercial requesters because they're selling newspapers? Which, when I look at this public interest threshold criteria, I can see how some of that that confusion might still exist.
Okay.
Also, I don't know if it would be useful, but one of the things that I like to include in training is examples of, here's an instance where a fee reduction or waiver would be appropriate, and include some potential examples of that. Not a non-exhaustive list, of course, but just some concrete guidance.
Can I ask a question about the federal law? You probably know this. Does the federal law have any provision for like people who are suing the federal government and making FOIA requests? Because of the largest requests that I've had the pleasure of working on, some of them have been like very important media requests that the state was happy to do for free, but we've also had litigation adversaries who appeared to be making public records requests for largely strategic reasons rather than any actual interest in the documents, just to make it more complicated for the state to do its work. And while I fully believe we should continue to provide the media with free access to information, I would be less excited about opening the state up to that kind of gamesmanship from.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That sort of request would usually be considered a commercial requester. If you have an attorney who's litigating some sort of monetary lawsuit against the government, they would be, for all intents and purposes, a commercial requester. They would pay all of these, the search and the review and the certification.
What about a political organization or a nonprofit? What's that?
That could fall into the other category unless they can prove that they're disseminating information to the public as a member of the news media. When I worked for Epic, we were members of the news media because we published a newsletter, a bi-weekly newsletter that went out to thousands of subscribers. We had a regularly published blog, and we were news media requesters.
So I'll just throw out the usual suspect, river keepers.
I can't say I'm familiar. Would you mind telling us more about that?
Well, I got a couple chuckles, so at least some people might be familiar. I'm just using one particular environmental interest group that does have a regular sort of newsletter, yet they are consistently asking for massive amounts of information from various local governments who may or may not be considering, a coal terminal, a biodiesel terminal, you name whatever it is. Now, I'll acknowledge right off the bat, this doesn't apply to my clients, not one. So what you're talking about right now is creating a two-tiered system in this state for dealing with costs. And I'm not suggesting that we want to adopt the state's rules. In fact, I suspect that a lot of my clients are not interested in adopting what the state is doing. So just be aware of what you are doing, right? You're dealing with Oregon administrative rules that apply to state agencies.
Well, it can also apply to the general public too. Rules can apply to particular groups too, interest groups as well. Rules can only be written by state agencies and boards and commissions, but they can apply to a broader group. So say for like construction contractors, all of their rules will relate to those who are licensed by the Construction Contractors Board. They're not state agencies, they're individual people. So that just being said, is that's why you have to have a public comment period. You also have to have, in this case, with this particular rule, because it relates to fees, you are going to have, and it can relate to outside businesses and that sort of thing about what they're going to be charged, you need to have what's called a Rules Advisory Committee that's going to tell you what that impact of these fees is going to be on those private entities, and you need to address that and also report that. So that's all part of that rulemaking process. So,
but you're not suggesting that DAS has the legal authority to make these rules applicable to anything other than state agencies, are you?
No, these, but they're gonna have an effect on the general, on a private sector, because I'm gonna charge that, so it's going to have an effect, it's gonna have a trickle-down effect, because somebody from a group that's making requests, like your group now, all of a sudden has to pay, or they weren't paying before, or were entitled away, they are now being impacted, so you have to have that extra, that rules advisory committee to look at the potential fiscal impact to private and enterprise.
And I think Mark was just pointing out that DAS has no authority over local.
No.
Well, no local government. And that, but that makes sense. I mean, there's a whole lot of other areas of public policy where state government doesn't know things.
Indeed.
So.
And please go right ahead.
That's what state experiment.
Yeah, this is why we're so quiet over here, perhaps, is because, you know, this will be a state experiment.
Right, it's not gonna affect how you guys.
That's correct. That's correct.
Although it may indirectly. Because
Indeed.
some of our members may look at this and say, hey, that kind of makes sense.
I like this public interest, I like this public interest review questionnaire. I might actually incorporate that into my policy, right?
So.
With that point, I mean, if what you're hearing in your tours is a lot of questions about these fee waivers, while this isn't, would not obviously be a mandate on cities, counties, or special districts, it does seem like it does open the door for your members to informally.
Absolutely, sure.
Take some of this to help, again, to get those issues off the table.
Yeah, and anecdotally they are. That's what I'm hearing from some of them. And I will say this question about who is news media is a totally fair concern, and it's something where there's some ambiguity even in the federal statute. It's something that we can address. I mean, we can define what would qualify for news media. I mean, I think right now the ambiguity in the policy and the statute is about this big. It's about whether or not there's a public interest. By just delineating, you know, news media generally would get a public interest reduction or fee waiver, that's making it a smaller area of ambiguity, which I think is useful.
Yeah, and the only reason I use River Keepers is simply because they've paralyzed one of my clients due to the volume and breadth of their requests.
Paralyzed or terrorized?
Both.
Well, I mean, it can be both, and that's the part where fees are actually really important, is it keeps the requester having some skin in the game, and it encourages and incentivizes narrower requests.
And does FOIA just really get rid of that entirely with the news media? So I'm thinking again about requests related to a recent former governor of the state of Oregon. And one of the requests that came in was literally for every document with the governor's name on it. The governor's name was on every state agency's letterhead, okay? So,
In FOIA, we would call that an unprotected request.
Responsive documentation is like gonna be insane. And the person was legitimately interested in anything that went to or from the governor, and, you know, I think you could make arguments about whether even that is an appropriate use of state resources to look at it that broadly. And so even though I actually believe that the state, certainly at DOJ, I don't remember the last time we charged a media requester for anything. And we need to keep doing that, but I would be a little bit worried if we completely took off the table the ability to impose any fees at any level of request on anyone who meets any of these categories we're talking about.
Which is why I think Nick's suggestion of a 50% reduction is actually, I think that's a good middle ground.
Or more honestly, or like complete waiver up to X $1,000 even would be legitimate, I think. But there are actually occasions where you get requests and without the, okay, we can do this for you, but it's going to cost like $600,000 and take us 4 years. Conversation. I don't know how far you're going to get in having the requester, who may or may not be looking to cooperate, just sort of independently cooperate.
Yeah, I think that's a good consideration.
That makes a lot of, I'm sorry, just to add a few more thoughts. I want to clarify something that, I mean, we didn't mean to start a discussion of like a two-tier system. I think everyone I mean, I think there's a way for you guys to craft language that enables everyone to qualify for a fee waiver, but there's also, you know, I mean, if you read the FOIA language, it's more of a presumption for media. It's not necessarily mandatory, I guess.
Oh, no, it is a shall.
It is a shall, okay. But I think the great thing about that FOIA language is it's artful, it's got complete clarity, it's a beautiful thing to read. I have some of the same confusion over the public interest threshold evaluation form. So just our suggestion is like, there's nuance to be had there. There's ingredients to define media that can be employed, and a little bit of research to go a long way towards crafting a really thoughtful, effective policy. And so, I don't know if you guys can do that today, but anyway, thanks for having the discussion. It's very productive so far.
There was a lot of ideas that were thrown out. I think that some of them are fairly easy to do in terms of making language more clear and explicit, but I think some of them are more substantial or would be substantial changes to what we've put in place that's already gone through a robust process. And so I think we need to have some further dialogue offline and maybe have this on the agenda for the next council meeting, and we can.
I mean, you and I can chat. I could make some revisions to this, proposed revisions in light of the conversation we've had here, and then we can bring it back to the council if others feel that would be appropriate.
Is that the moment to make a formal recommendation to have some kind of media reduction language in this, or is it better done now?
I mean, it sounds like the majority of people around the table feel like that's a good idea.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I would be happy to take a stab at crafting some language if you want me to.
I think I probably need to go back and have some discussions with my superiors as well.
I'm kind of not comfortable just because this doesn't apply. Go and do great work. I'd be interested in what the other state agencies also have to say. Is this going to work for them? You know, obviously you've gone through with the enterprise group and so forth. I assume that everything's fine, but we're talking about some pretty substantial departures from what you had on the paper now.
Yeah.
And so I do think that it would be wise to go back and connect to ensure that you aren't creating new problems that you haven't anticipated before we come back and have another full-on discussion about should this go forward.
It's a slippery slope. Yeah. And I know because we have been abused by the media when they've come to ask for certain records and wanting stuff. But if you have, I think it's the education piece and having that conversation. I'm not really interested in doing a reporter's research for them, and yet we get reporters repeatedly asking us to do the research for them. I'll give you the information, I'll get you all the information you want, but I'm not going to do your research for you. And I think that's where the conversation, and that's where it really gets tricky, is when you give the media, if you're going to give a media exemption, is what is that exemption for? And when do you get to draw the line and say, no, you're abusing this, and that sort of thing. And I just don't want to open up a policy. I do think that the question, if I had to go through 8 questions on every request that we get, I wouldn't do it. I just wouldn't do it. And I think that's what you find that happens in agency land. They just can't process that much on every request that comes through. So the reality is how can we make it so it's simple and straightforward to determine whether or not a waiver does exist. But because if you have to go through this process on every request, and I know that's what happens in agencies, is they just don't do it. And then they just make a decision, and that's why the decisions aren't consistent either, is because it's too much for them to do.
I think it can be possible to make the presumption of reduction of cost for the media without, like, separate from the question of the reasonableness of the request. I mean, it seems to be that could be done.
Oh, yeah. But it's just how many questions are we answering when we have to answer a request?
Yeah, I think it's maybe too hard. I mean, if the reduction is presumptive, then the fee waiver test is another thing, right? Like, can those be separate? But in FOIA it is this way, right? Where it's presumed reduced for press, and then
I mean, media would be included in a list of potential public interest considerations.
Yeah, and that's all I'm saying is keep it simple. Keep it so that the average person working at the desk getting this request is going to be able to make a determination and a decision in a fairly reasonable amount of time. It's not, because it is frustrating when you have to look at all of the things that are on there. I mean, fortunately for us, we don't need to look at half of this stuff because all of our stuff is accessible, all of our stuff is out there for people to use, and most of it's online. And so, I mean, we're kind of different, but I'm just saying, based on my work with agencies, especially local governments, that's their problem, is they're just so confused, they just don't know what to do.
So concretely, what would it be helpful for you to have from us?
I actually don't know the answer to that question right now. I think it would be helpful. I don't know. I would like to take back this feedback back to my agency, because we did, like I said, we went through a robust process. A lot of agencies gave input into this. We've been using it as a process for, well, quite some time. Agency directors approved policy, and so I'd like to have some more conversations offline. I don't know exactly what I need just yet.
So maybe we can revisit this at our next meeting. I guess it's sounding more like it's going to be October now, since late September is a lot of conferences. Maybe we can revisit it then.
Okay.
Does that sound?
Yeah.
Or others want to do that?
Yeah. In September legislative, the Public Records Committee, Legislative Council Committee is going to be maybe making recommendations on the legislature's new policy on fee waivers. And what that one would do would be an automatic 40% to reduction for news media and for nonprofits, essentially. And then if you are in that group and you get that 40%, if you can show that your request is narrowly tailored to get specific information that doesn't waste public funds, then you get a complete waiver. So that way, if you say, give me everything on this, you still get the 40%. But if you say, give me specific communications between this person and this lobbyist, then you would get it automatic.
That's a great approach.
And so that policy will be considered during September legislative session.
So that would be.
And that applies to the legislative assembly?
Yes.
Okay. Is that your brainchild, Shimon?
It is a simplification of the DAS policy, essentially. It also sets tiers for the different, like the clerical, but it makes it clear that it doesn't matter who's doing the work in the policy, that it's a matter of for these activities, then we don't put the person, we say these kinds of activities.
So that rule would only apply to legislative assembly?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, I think that's a
sounds
good
good.
approach.
Elegant, yeah.
I like that.
Can I ask a quick follow-up question? Isn't the legislative assembly exempt from some public records, like?
Meeting.
Excellent. Sorry, I didn't want to start any trouble, but.
But it gets a little more complicated, but yeah,
Yep.
just during session.
We are going to talk about that.
Yeah, we are.
Later.
I'm not going to open my mouth.
All right, so we're doing pretty good on our schedule here still, so let's just take a short little break, 10 minutes. Please return by 20 till.
How long do you, I mean, just a rough estimate, is it, I don't think it's gonna go to 4.
It likely isn't. I can't make guarantees. It
I
depends
get it,
on the
so we have,
presentation. So we have the
Legislative
legislative
concept.
concept, and I don't anticipate that the discussion of administrative rules is gonna take very long, and since we've been accepting public comment as we go, I don't anticipate that that will be very long.
Got feet for the room here. Oh, yeah, the city of Salem is really pretty, aggressive on that.
I got a little nasty gram on my car windshield the other day, I was parked in the bus zone.
Oh, yeah, and then the property taxes related to state buildings, so. Yes, there are. There actually, that area, and we should have told you, you don't park in that area. You can park in the parking lot. You can park in the parking lot, but not in the bus zone.
Well, you say you get a ticket.
Well, because we can. Yes.
Well,
Whether they want to challenge it.
I've got the flying.
Oh, no. Gonna be lots.
You weren't long time.
I don't.
Yeah, in lizard man or the reptile guy is going to be there.
Well, but-
He's over to be the reptile guy.
I know.
You have to get that.
Well, yeah.
No hard to drop the first.
You know,
Yeah. And he's very engaged. I wonder.
Yeah, I was waiting for that. Okay. Then I went to the line.
Then they'll say, okay, let's just do this.
Well, I can't drink coffee now.
But
no, it's you don't even have a proper water picture. Hey, providing you with non-poisonous water. Oh, yeah.
Right.
Oh, I mean, I'm really excited. This was definitely a thing that we wanted. So, yeah. And I mean, we're, health affected. So, we're starting with, like, you know, having two people working and taking care of an infant is out.
What you don't really know is that your life actually is gonna change, right? First, when you have a baby, and second, when the baby was put down. And you'll be like on that edge of sanity and insanity. But then, once you can no longer like sit down and relax, be there when you come back, it's like, oh, it's great.
I think that's the moment when the dog.
Oh, yeah.
Because you.
I can go. And you're gonna add a child. My wife and I didn't really consider a puppy like she was like 6 months pregnant.
Right.
So we were like, oh, can we get a puppy? And I was like,
Would you like to house train two creatures at the same time?
No, this whole other thing goes.
No.
Yeah, that was the right choice. Our first child.
And you were.
I mean, we live in southeast Portland, so we don't have a chauffeur a lot anyway. But drive her once a week to her. It's really about it. You will not get in that scenario because you foolishly chose to go to Salem against my better counsel.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, we're buying a house for everything in that way. Necessary funding.
Excellent.
When we moved, there's another one game as well, because we just weren't finding the amount of space that we needed for trade goals and I know, I would never.
What are they released?
They're small, it's still less than 50 little pounds. So 15 pounds, 25. I mean, they're good dogs, there's many of them. It was, he had one dog and I had two already when we met.
We met Aaron not he and his children together own 3 dogs. One of which we adopted after finding in a trash heap in Bosnia.
Oh, yeah, that's how I ended up in one of my dogs, I got him. And I was like, I have to bring it home.
So yeah, they have a Bosnian trash hound. Who initially, maybe Aaron's favorite.
Mine's a West Virginian, three dogs, and three Southern West Virginian.
Mean streak.
And he is crazy, he's a great little thing. No, I was ATVing with my dad. So we're on our final day, and we docked along the road, we took a nap to get back to the campground, and there's this little dog in the middle of the road, this big truck comes along, and pushes him. And so the dog did. So I called the dog over to him, he was super friendly, and I picked him up, and I got him in one hand, and I was driving the ATV with the other, all the way back to the campground. And my dad looked at me when I got back, and he was like, I didn't anticipate having a second dog. And he's a little disgusting. Like, he's really cute. His saving grace. His behavior is not yeah, so we got a dog too,
Is also not a he's like good but independent minded. Like you want him to come, let's think about it. Don't take your time, maybe he'll drink some water. Eventually he'll move you. Not like what is it? Okay.
Can't wait to make you happy.
All right, I'll do that.
Entirely common.
Ginger, maybe if you and me might be able to meet with the partners early. Ginger, sorry, maybe you and me.
No. Not mine. You know. And, yeah, no, I'm happy.
Long time no see.
Yeah.
The issue that I would.
I mean, it's incentivizing a lot of my.
Especially if you combine that with the requirement the agency to meet.
Okay. I'll just give you an email.
Yeah.
Sorry to miss you, if you're available, what time is it? Higher life, you can
I
recognize the issue.
No, they were very initiative.
Actually, we are headed Saturday.
What I've discovered almost across the board is how so I made a lot of good friends. Once you get to the first fight, then they realize, yeah, so, but I think we.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I mean, the three young ladies that were asked did a lot of things.
Good.
Yeah, because Jenny or Boyd or Carl.
How are you, hey, handsome? How are you? Great.
I was using the
All right. We're gonna go ahead and get started. Hopefully everyone has availed themselves of the snack.
Yeah.
I apologize for the lack of coffee, but we do not have a proper coffee maker in this building. All we have is a Keurig, which you'd be in the line for a long time.
Do you need a motion?
So we are going to start off with a discussion about legislative concepts. And I would love to hear your feedback on other additional legislative concepts. I had a couple of things that were on my list. I spoke with you before about the possibility of reporting requirements. And there were some objections to that, which I think were well-founded, concerns that this would potentially, if there were too many reporting requirements, it would potentially slow request processing or give agencies an excuse to slow request processing and create some additional bureaucratic hurdles. So in light of that, I thought that it would be good to just craft a narrow and fairly non-onerous reporting requirement provision, which I have included in the handouts over there if you don't have it yet. So this requires annual reporting on the number of requests for records to which the agency has not completed its response within the 15 business day time frame included in 192.3295A. The number of requests for records to which the agency has not completed its response within 60 calendar days. The number of requests for a fee waiver or reduction which the agency has denied, and a complete list of all statutes, regulations, or administrative rules that the agency has relied upon to authorize the agency to withhold information, and the number of occasions on which each statute was relied upon. I did craft this based on some of the language. I also distributed the FOIA itself, the FOIA language with the annual reporting requirements. As you can see, it's quite exhaustive. It's 3 pages of reporting requirements under the FOIA. So I thought if we could make this narrower and only require agencies to track and report on requests where they're not within that 15 business day deadline, I thought that that would be useful to address the concerns that this would slow down simple requests. And this would only apply, again, to state agencies. So I am very interested in hearing feedback on this. Sure.
Number 3, the number of requests for fee waiver.
Which the agency has denied.
Right. What about the dollars involved, so you can see the scale? You know, they turn it in, you know, request for $600,000, or they turn down a request for $100 fee waiver.
Yeah. How would you craft that language? Do you have a suggestion?
Well, I'll put together a task force to analyze the language. That's the Mark in charge of it.
So would you like the agencies to disclose the total amount of fees that they're collecting?
Well,
or something more
what I'm trying to get at is what's really important is not the number of denials, it's how much money we're talking about, right? That's what's the public cost at issue, either for disclosure or against disclosure. And so I just would like to, I don't have the language in my head. What I'm trying to get my arms around is, okay, agencies in the past year denied 42 fee waivers for a total of, $285,000 or whatever.
I think you'd want to know the cost of each request, because there could be one that was $284,000, one that was 26, and you get a really skewed data set. So.
And the cost associated with each denial?
Yeah. No, not the cost of the denials. You told me you're going to charge me $1,000 per record. You denied that fee waiver. So the cost imposed on the public for access to that record is going to be $1,000.
So the total cost of records that were provided in an instance where a fee waiver or reduction was requested and denied. And denied. Yeah. Okay. That was good.
Wait, is it just, I'm confused now, if you want to know how much they collected or how much they charged, regardless of whether the person agreed?
I want to know how much they denied.
Probably regardless of whether.
Right, but regardless of whether or not they actually paid it, right?
Right.
So those documents they collected.
Okay, so fees assessed, not collected.
That's
Okay.
all I was getting at. Sorry.
Maybe something like the number of requests for fee waiver reduction which the agency has denied, and figures for, or the number, the total fees is set in each instance.
In each instance might be, I don't know, what are other things, what are
Oh,
other?
If they're gonna
denial.
if they're gonna compute the total, I would think they're gonna have to collect the individual
Yeah.
dollar figures, so.
Yeah, just so you don't get the data problem that we just discussed over here, where you have giant.
Okay.
There's some more complexity to this though, right? Because what if someone asks for a waiver, the waiver is denied, but they are granted a reduction? Like, you want to know, what is it that you're wanting to know? Is it the amount that they collected and the amount that they didn't collect together, or is it?
That's getting much more complex.
I know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to keep it simple. I think that the key to getting something passed is to keep it as simple as possible. And then we can add complexity later if this works and it doesn't cause problems. Karen has comments.
Technically, it's in the process, the fee waiver question is for a cost question. So whether that fee waiver is approved or denied will determine whether there is even an estimate, or a lot of times whether there is an estimate or what that estimate might be, because a lot of times I'm denying your request. Well, what if I narrow it down? That often there will be no cost associated with the denial. Right? Well, at least from what I've seen in my experience, that probably half the denials won't actually have a cost associated with it because it will be adjusted. And so the cost will be based on some other request other than what was denied initially.
How about and the list of the resulting fees?
Well, I guess what I'm trying to get at is, who's gonna do what with this information? That's what I'm trying to get my head around, is just knowing the number of fee waivers rejected, how do we analyze that? What does that tell us?
Would it be more helpful to know the ratio of these waivers that are rejected?
Some comparative, I mean, just the raw number itself, while maybe sort of, interest and trivia, again, it doesn't seem to suggest you've got enough information to make any policy change based on that. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That might be true of the other categories too, the first two.
I mean, the first two are designed to get to the question of whether or not the agencies are actually meeting that 15 business day.
But don't you need to know how often they are, and not just how often they're not, to really assess them?
Well, but then we get back to the question of, is collecting that data going to create a bureaucratic drag on the system? Which was the concern that was expressed last time, that if agencies have to keep track of every single simple request that they get, the concern was that that was going to slow down the processing of those simple requests. I mean, I'm happy to put that in there, but there were concerns last time that were expressed by others around the table about that slowing down the process.
I think if you want to have a meaningful metric, you need to know how many of the ones processed, and you need to know the total, and then how many did not meet. If you want a meaningful metric, because they could have not met the thing 15 times, but that's 16 out of 15, and so you're saying, oh, 15 is a low number, but that's 100%. They're not meeting their requirement 100% of the time, versus, knowing what percentage is. I don't know how that's going to slow down requests. I don't know how an agency can meaningfully say that if they're keeping track of their public records requests, you can't tell me that you're not keeping track, although some are just keeping track in a spreadsheet or a tick sheet. But I don't know. If we're going to really move forward on making reform to what we're doing, we need to know what's out there. How can you make any kind of analysis if we don't know what's out there? And that's, I think in reality is the question. It's, it may be that less than 1% of all requests are the problematic ones. So are we going to spend all of our time just to deal with that 1%? Or is it, 50% or 100% or 75%? I think those are the things that we need to, and before any of our groups can move forward, we need to have some meaningful metrics.
Yeah, I mean, I'm inclined to agree that agencies should be collecting data on how many requests they receive in total and the disposition of all those requests, but I will remind you that there were some around this table last time who were,
I mean, I can tell
who
you.
were concerned that that would slow the system. I mean, what I don't want here is for the perfect to be the enemy of the good. The lack of data about this it's shrouding perhaps poor performance on the part of at least some agencies in this state. And the only way that we're going to get accountability and be able to identify which agencies have a particular problem with public records requests, and the only way we're going to ensure that agencies meet these deadlines in the statute is by revealing which ones aren't and how often they aren't.
So I can tell you just very easily how it would happen that we would not be keeping good track necessarily of our requests, which is maybe we announce an indictment or that we're going to be bringing charges against someone, get copies of, or get requests from a bajillion people to me, to the press secretary, or communications director from reporters around the state wanting copies of the indictment, right? And we just send them copies of the indictment. Like, we don't track those as public records requests, but they clearly are that. And there are instances where we're essentially responding instantaneously. And now, but maybe it doesn't matter, right? And I think, would I go and enter those in a log? Like, no, it's not worth it to me. And I think DOJ's numbers are going to look good enough anyway without sort of counting all these nice instances that it probably doesn't matter. But I think that there are a lot of cases where people are just literally instantly providing what are clearly public records to people essentially on demand.
But remember, Michael, when we talked about this last time, we thought of this imaginary technical solution that I think probably could be done, which is simply create an email address that you CC. Anytime you send out one of those emails, that would be like, it gets recorded in a database in the story.
Yeah, I mean, I think it wouldn't be done perfectly, and this would create an incentive on agencies to like dot I's and cross T's. But I mean, maybe not enough of one to be worried about.
I mean, I've heard from other journalists concerns about, the incentive to create a new system, say, like certain cities use, to collect all.
Cities that shall remain unnamed.
Large cities, parts of Oregon, that collect all public records requests through an online portal and force everyone to go through this portal, even for very simple requests. And I think that is a concern, and I think that the way Ginger has worded it now, I mean, my sense is to create an incentive. I mean, if you're doing the right thing, meeting your deadlines, then you don't have to do extra work and record it. If you miss your deadlines, then you have to, that should be the aberration where you end up recording it. So I think, I mean, that's the benefit of this language. That said, I think I agree that, I mean, some data is better than no data. And so whatever is going to, whatever is going to fly, I think the benefits of having more data outweigh the risks of more cities adopting that type of system.
I mean, we're not going to adopt that system.
Well, as somebody has advocated getting as much online as possible, it would be helpful to know what basic kinds of, if there's just some repeaters, a lot of repeaters that maybe can take it off the plate of the agency if they're online, and it could be shown as a cost-saving measure simply because, spend staff time on it. So it'd be kind of good to know, the cost to the agency. I don't know how that would work, but it seems like somewhere along the line they're keeping track of their time if they're providing waivers. I mean, not in the instances you were just talking about where you're just sending it off, but in those cases where there is some staff time involved and they are keeping track of that somewhere. So I don't know if that can be categorized as a different kind of time, staff time or what, but it would be helpful to know how much it would save the state to get more of the stuff, information online, if possible.
My sense is that a lot of agencies, and I mentioned this last time, probably aren't doing a very good job of tracking public records requests because of the lack of a technological solution. And so I do fear that, I like the idea of having this recording requirement, but I do fear that the data might not be 100% accurate, but at least it's a starting point. But I just have to put that plug in every time, that it would be nice if we had an enterprise-wide solution. Doesn't necessarily have to be an online portal, but some sort of mechanism that would help us be able to track and mine data in a way that's not a manual process of going through, you know, an Excel spreadsheet or what have you.
I mean, my hope is that if there are some reporting requirements that are put in place that will incentivize agencies and also give them some leverage to then justify the purchase of better tracking tools. Because this lack of tracking, I mean, I think it is accounting for at least some of the delay in responses or requests that are just entirely lost.
I agree. I totally agree.
They fall into the black hole.
Yep.
But I mean, I am sensitive to, I had thought, you know, a system similar to what some large cities here in Oregon are using would be a good idea, but I heard a lot of negative feedback about those systems. So.
Emily, the governor has their requests, right? You're tracking your requests and you're putting them all up online, because I know the Secretary of State copied pretty much what you guys were doing. And is something like that going to bring in enough of data that then it can be looked at and analyzed from that? They're all online. Every request, public records request the governor gets, the Secretary of State gets, is online. It's there for the public to view. Is that just something that then we could actually go in and then mine the data from it, get the information from it, and do looking at a report, seeing what's being resolved, what's not being resolved, how long did it take, that sort of thing. An individual can go in there and look at that now, today, and see that, but at least it's a start, and it's just all this requiring the agency to do is record and track. And it has nothing to do whether it's a routine request or not. There isn't any additional work except for when the request comes in, it gets logged.
So is the proposal then to have all of the state agencies do something similar to what the governor's office is doing, where they just post everything up online?
I think that's a simple solution for right now. I don't know if, you know, what it's going to, I don't know what the impact is. But I mean, just to say, well, we can't track stuff because we don't have a good mechanism to do. This is what we've done a lot with public records. And in 34 years, we just keep kicking the can down the road and making the same mistakes over and over and over again. There's stuff out there that's being done. We don't have to go to a commercial solution right yet if we're just trying to get some simple metrics so that we can look and say, this is what needs to be, this is what's happening, this is what needs to be done, and then make the case for an enterprise-wide solution that maybe gets built to customize to what we need, or we buy something off the shelf. But right now, everything we have around public records is anecdotal.
Yeah, I think the simpler that we can make this, the better off we will be. So.
And I think what the governor's done and what, you know, and then, like I said, we just copied, Secretary of State literally just copied what the governor did. And I don't even know, I think it's just an Excel spreadsheet that shows up online. And then you have the full transparency too. These are the requests that come in, this is what happened, this is when it was responded to.
So what do others think of that as an alternative to require that all public records responses are put up online? That is the proposal, right?
There was something to that, yeah. I think it's.
How much of a delay will you allow? I have friends who are reporters who don't necessarily like their request posted on the internet immediately.
Getting scooped.
And I like those people and value my relationship with them.
I mean, it's a legitimate concern. I know when I was making public records requests, when we would get a document set, the very first question that a reporter would ask when we take the documents out to them was, have you shared this with anyone else? And it was significantly less newsworthy. If it had been posted up online already, you know, the Times wouldn't even look at it. So, I mean, I think
What is the lag right now for posting that, for the governor's office? I don't know. Do you know it, Emily?
We generally post, I generally post right when I send it out.
And I think that's what we do in the Secretary of State's office as well, is it gets posted once we've answered. The individual gets the request, but once we've sent it to them, it gets posted.
Does that, sorry.
Just, if it's helpful, just so we don't sound completely craft, and competition oriented, the reality is, if we don't have time to pursue records in depth and flesh out a kind of a fair and comprehensive story, and we're just gonna have it torn away from us by a different outlet that's not so worried about that, then it's a disincentive to pursue things. So that's where the competitive, part of what's driving the competitive element. One easy way to address that I can see, off the top of my head, is you gotta wait until the records are assembled before posting the request. And then typically there's
Does assemble me.
Does the practice of immediately putting that stuff out there, and it's really for the journalists in the room, does that incentivize a more general request, so you're not tipping your hand?
It incentivizes broader requests. If you have one person that you're looking for, and you don't want the competition to know, you'll think of a category that they fit into.
And so that goes back to all your, well, the fees, again, because you're gonna ask for broader information, thereby forcing the public entity to spend more time and effort trying to gather the information that is more broad than you would necessarily want it to be. Is this really the policy we want to be going down?
I think we can solve this by just putting a lag on any kind of online posting requirement of like 3 months or.
Well, it also gets to,
If you want to do it quicker.
Yeah, I mean, that is the simple solution to these, that addresses these concerns.
but I don't know that it does. Because it creates a system of exposing methods and methodologies for reporters. And like you, Michael, I value my relationship with certain reporters that I've built rapport with. And sometimes they send me public records requests. Other times, they just call me and talk to me, and it's informal. I say, oh yeah, go here, or here's this. It's not really a formal records request. I'm just working with them. I'm getting them information. And I fear, maybe this is a good thing, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't fear it, that you might drive more reporters into avoiding having to do a public records request because they don't want to post it. So they're doing these informal things. And maybe that's not a bad thing. I've just talked myself into it. Okay, never mind. Rewind.
Reporting. I was going to say, just for the purposes that I have, I wouldn't necessarily want to log daily or weekly or monthly even. I just kind of want to get a kind of a good measure, I guess, a year perhaps, of what categories, what sorts of documents are being requested, and to look into seeing if those it would be feasible to put some of those online, because there'd be less. That's where I'm coming from, but I'm sure there's some other issues.
Right. I mean, what are we trying to measure here? Are we trying to measure whether or not state agencies are meeting the timelines? That's it.
I think that's it, which, I mean, I think.
And so why do you have to identify the source? Why do you have to identify, do you have to go through what Emily is doing in such a comprehensive manner versus just, did you meet the deadline or did you not meet the deadline? And out of how many theoretical, to take a guess, how many public records requests you got, how many of them did you not meet the deadline, and why?
And maybe a way to address the circumstances I was talking about where people are just sending things to sort of very informal requests is tie the reporting requirement to the requests that actually are received pursuant to the agency's procedures, which is something we did with respect to the deadlines already, right? So there's like, agencies, as we discussed previously, are required to have a formal intake process. And those are the ones that the deadlines actually apply to as a matter of statute. So maybe if you take that as your subset of requests, then you can avoid like needing agencies to feel like this is going to help them. I mean, you still risk them, redirecting people, but if if Mr. Steele was okay with that, I certainly am not.
You know, but that gets back to just doing an Excel spreadsheet that we talked about earlier, but you said that's going to delay, you know, the reporting requirement, but there's, you know, I wanted to know how many, agencies are required to have a formal process, how many of them do? Have we ever looked at all the formal processes within a state agency and evaluated what they have? Are they all in compliance? It's like with the records management policy and procedure, there's one more agency that is now in compliance because they sent their update, so that makes it 3. But yeah, they were all in compliance in 2016, but they're all out of compliance because the changes to the public records law now. And if it wasn't for the fact that they were being hounded, I mean, that requirement was in 2011. That was a 2011 statutory requirement that said every agency had to have a policy. But if you have no enforcement or no penalty on the end, they're not going to do it.
So that public records policy is something I'm very aware of. Most agencies don't appear to have one, at least not available on their website. And that's something that I hope to take on. I made an offer to all of the government entities that I have trained. I will help you craft that, but most of them are not in compliance with the law right now.
I can tell you with utmost certainty that at least our 3 organizations have model public records policies that we share regularly with our members.
And we push them on our members, because with the changes in 2017, it's even more important to have your public records policies not only adopted, updated, but posted online.
Yeah.
With a single point of contact that anybody in the public can shoot an email to. Yeah, and so I've been pushing this. So if you tell me any of my 36 members don't have one, I'll get on.
Yeah, I pushed that very hard in the training and even made the offer to help them craft one if they don't have
We
one.
make it a part of our board member trainings for all of our membership. So this is, you know, one of our pillar issues on public meetings, public records. You need to know what your policy is. And if you don't have a policy, here's a construct that we think will get you there.
Yeah.
So I totally agree that people should be in compliance with this law, and, you know, but putting aside the fact that maybe they're not, isn't that still the thing we want to measure, is like the request that should be coming in pursuant to the policies they're legally required to have?
So the proposal on the table, if I understand it, is to change for the commissions here. It should say the number of requests received pursuant to the agency's public records policy for records to which the agency has not completed its response within the 15 business day timeframe included in the statute.
But also then, because I think the overarching point is to then also require data about the number of overall requests.
I think you could change all of these to has or has not.
Okay.
Has and has not.
Separate.
Right.
Because you need to know what percentage they're goofing up.
Right.
Right.
Exactly. That's the whole point.
Just the number that they're goofing up.
And if
doesn't
we
tell you
could
anything.
even start with that.
Well, some,
Okay.
It's the number of acknowledgements. You could you're gonna have the number of acknowledgements, right?
for example.
You have to do it within 5 days.
Or you just receive the request, which is simpler, I guess.
Yeah.
So number of requests received pursuant to the agency's public records policy.
And then of those, the number in which they've exceeded the deadline.
Yeah, okay.
And then somebody.
And they'll need to know the number they'll take.
Right.
Number withdrawn. Or
Withdrawn?
cancel, or, because there is a statute about,
You can withdraw
when you withdraw, or the agency can close it out in 60 days.
after 60 days.
Which I want to talk about later.
We want to say excluding requests that are withdrawn pursuant to.
Or the lawfully terminated.
I think you just build a spreadsheet, right, with the right columns, and you'll get the right answers.
I think you'll avoid fiscal that way.
I do believe that the governor's rule that Mary Beth referred to from 2014 mandates also a designee.
It does.
Yeah, if you want, I leave it to you whether you want to make that narrow or not, but I think to the question of fees or getting any kind of fee total, if it's the designee, that should be straightforward.
Explain, I'm sorry, I don't.
If your number one applies to the policy of the agency, that could be fairly widespread. If it applied only to the designee, that's a single person. And so on question 3, to get to what Les was after some minutes ago about getting some kind of total on CSS, if it's the designee of the agency and the person in charge, theoretically, they would be responsible for this working their time.
So what's the language that you're proposing?
Rather than, the number of requests for the policy, received by the designee, and then adding on number 3, the number of requests for a fee waiver reduction which the agency has denied, and a list of subsequently listed.
My concern there is that most of the requests are probably not being received by the designee because most of the agencies are not making the information about who the designee is publicly available. So we wouldn't actually be getting at that much information, is the concern. I mean, I looked online and I just did a brief survey of the state agencies. Almost none of them have up on their website, and this is the state agency.
I know.
Almost none of them have up on their website, at least, which I would interpret that to be publicly available, any kind of designee for public records.
But you know, if they report out 0 public records requests last year, with, you know, we can certainly do a spot check, we in the fourth estate, and say, well, actually, I've been on 2 or 3.
To be fair, the problem with naming individuals is they sometimes leave the office or like either temporarily or permanently.
But that's easy to solve. You just have generic public records request at OregonCounty.org.
Right, but that's not an individual. That's my point.
Okay,
But that
can
can be fed to the current individual that is public
But-
record.
The agencies that did name designees named job titles, they didn't name people.
Right.
So,
I'm trying to remember how we wrote this in '07, because
yeah.
we wrote it as, I remember this from the '07 session, and you had to name an individual.
But then you just have the email link that they click on.
Right,
They
something
go a generic, so legal counsel at blah, blah, blah.
I'm thinking of the 2014 version, but it's interesting that we have had 2 ways of this stuff.
So I think this is something that I could address from my position, just doing a research project. Once I have a deputy, which agencies are in compliance, which are not. Reach out to the agencies that are not in compliance, encourage them to be in compliance. If that doesn't work, there's always naming and shaming. So I think that's something that we don't need a legislative fix for. But let's just stay focused on this for now because I am sensitive to the time. We had a couple of comments.
Yeah, I was gonna say the loophole is, you said most of them are compliant, if you have named designee, then you don't have any requests that were over 60 days that were given to the named designee, because you don't have one. So,
Exactly.
But the way we constructed the statute, if you don't have a named designee, I believe the clock starts to run as soon as anybody in that agency gets that public record.
but the reporting requirement was tied to being received by the named designee.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
That.
If they're not publicizing who their name designee is, that person's not going to receive, and we're not going to get any data. So there was a comment back there.
So I have a comment about the state agencies being, what's the word, all the same, consistent on their landing page. Is there any way to make it so that once a user goes to their landing page, that there's a link there for the public record?
Potentially, yeah, and I think that's something that I can address once I have a deputy and have a little bit more bandwidth. I think that's probably one of the research avenues that we're going to be looking at, because this is a problem. The fact that the agencies, there is a law, it is very clear in what they have to do to be in compliance, and almost none of them are in compliance. So I think that making it something that's available on a landing page is a good idea.
And it is interesting because a lot of the state agencies in their budget requests going in right now are asking for, guess what? Additional money for public records and being compliant with the 2017 law. Seems to me that if they're asking for dough, they have some designated people.
Yeah, so, and that's something, like I said, the research will be to identify which agencies are not in compliance, to reach out to those agencies and first give them a chance to get in line. And then if they continue to not be in compliance, to issue a report that says the list of agencies that isn't in compliance. So, I mean, I don't like to use the stick, but we'll try with the carrot first, and then if the carrot doesn't work, move on to the stick.
I do think that idea is really a good one to publicize it out consistently across agency websites. And I know there's, I believe it's called the e-governance board, You know,
Yeah.
part of DAS or?
Yes, it's chaired, well, yes, it's part of DAS and it's chaired by
And,
ODOT.
and they work on,
All things web.
but
Yeah.
basically making the website useful for citizens,
Yes,
including things like telling people how to file public records requests.
yeah.
So this sort of gets back to, I don't mean to divert, but you mentioned this very large metropolitan area that apparently is receiving public records from a single site. I'm scratching my head here a little, Steve. Can you help us understand what the problem is up there and how we potentially avoid those problems with what we're discussing now?
I think the concern that's been raised is that, that Portland,
A city in a county with more than 750,000 people, right?
there's this website that, where people can file records requests, but whereas in the past, I know one particular reporter would just walk into the budget office or the human resources office and say, so how long has so-and-so been an employee of the city? Well, you're gonna have to go through the records portal. And that's happening a lot more anecdotally because since this.
So what had been traditionally informal has become far more rigid and formal.
But they can track their own compliance more easily that way, is the challenge. So,
Yeah.
They did a little smarter than that too. For example, like you get in a car accident, you gotta have an accident report for your insurance. They required accident reports to come through the portal.
Oh.
So they had their numbers
A copy of
by making you have to get your accident report.
when it used to be where you just filed it at the central precinct.
Yeah,
Right.
Now you gotta put it through the portal.
Right.
And then it's adding.
Okay, I mean, that helps, I appreciate it.
They've used it as a tool to create additional bureaucratic rules.
Right.
Nick, I'm sorry.
Sorry, just to add, I mean, in effect, this large metropolitan city, in effect, is, many agencies are using this as kind of a shield from dealing with the public. So if they get a request which they have questions about, like I did one request saying, hey, looking for one document, whatever document you want to send me that has the names of officers who've been terminated and rehired in the last 3 years. I don't care, whatever's easiest for you guys, just send me an email with the information. But they said, well, we're not going to give you this information without a formal record. I'm like, hey, whatever. Whatever's easiest for you guys, give it to me, I'll go away. And after like 4 weeks, there was a whole email chain that I later got evidence of that they were debating this, and finally the city attorney sent me an email saying, yeah, you do not subscribe to record request under the law. And therefore, you know, your request is denied. Thank you very much. Great, well, then I'll just file an appeal, and we certainly make the system work better that way. Instead of just picking up the phone and calling me, it's used to obstruct interactions with the public. They hide behind it.
I appreciate these descriptions, because how do you avoid these problems if we pursue what we suggest by creating a avenue to create public records requests on a department's web page? I mean, you're gonna face potentially the same challenges.
Well, I should say, that doesn't mean they couldn't make changes to improve the system, and, you know.
There are ways, and I mean, it's the whole idea of informal versus formal. The stuff, you know, and it's very clear, and I can't remember what year it was, they passed that law that state agencies, again, were supposed to classify all their information from a 1 to a 4. 1 being published, 2 being limited, 3 being restricted, and 4 being critical. Okay, everything theoretically that was a 1 was supposed to be readily available to the public. There's really nothing that the agency has to do. It's either published on their website, or it's a brochure or a pamphlet or something, or an easy request and those are all considered to be informal, and those really shouldn't be counted as your numbers for public records requests, because that information is readily available to the public. where you started counting was the 2s, the 3s, and the 4s. Is that was information that the agency actually had to do work to go and find the request. And these people who are going to these web portals, again, it's a way for them to, they're sold on the idea that they can put all of the information, and this is where it's very frustrating in dealing with vendors, that they can put all of their information so they don't have to do anything, everything comes in uniformly, and then they can respond to it, you know, in a uniform manner. And that's what's forcing these informal requests now to go through these systems. It's very easy to not have to do that. It's just a matter of policy by the agency to set their policy to basically say, you know what, informal requests are not going through the portal. It's just crazy. But there's no reason for them to not do it because they've been sold on this idea where they're getting everything and it's going to be totally managed and they'll get all the information that they need.
And it'll improve your numbers if you put the easy stuff in.
Yes.
So, and that's the incentive I was talking about, right? But I mean, honestly, I think, like, it's not going to change the way I do business if we're not going to count. I mean, that's just dumb. Like, I don't frankly care enough about measured performance to, like, redirect people. And I think there's also a difference between making sure that whatever your policy for making requests is easy to find online so people know how to make requests. That's not the same as making everyone make a request through some, like, overly bureaucratic system. So I think the idea that there should be kind of, or that ideally there would be a uniform layout to some degree anyway within the state where, you know, if you're looking for public records from one agency or another agency, the web page is going to have the public records button in roughly the same place. That makes sense to me.
So I can make a suggestion because my IT person suggested this to me, and we're a small agency, but she just said, Rob, let's just put a little link on the bottom of our template. So it appears, so right now you go to any AOC webpage, and the bottom is just a link to public records, and you click on it, it takes you to a page that has our public records policy, a link to submit a public records request, and it's on every single webpage, and it's in the same place. And the state agencies, largely, they're working on the same templates, aren't they? I mean, the state agency websites have the same general appearance.
Yep.
You just put it on the frames or whatever the background is and have a link for consistent for every agency, and you're done.
Yeah, and you don't need to adopt GovQA necessarily to do that.
No, you know, it sounds very easy, but I know that every agency, when they went through their conversion, that they went through very specific processes to land with how their page is organized. So it would be something that we would need to talk to the eGov committee about because there's how many state agencies? I don't know.
Thousands.
Comment there in the back.
Well, I guess to move the discussion forward, I mean, to the extent that there's concern about the possibility, the single portal kind of stalking horse, I'm not as concerned about it as other people are, I think, and I personally would be willing to support, you know, the amended proposal, because I think it does get us somewhere in terms of data. And, you know, I think about it like in terms of the formal versus informal, like, my organization has an IT department where I used to be able to knock on the door and say, I got a problem with my computer. Now I have to file a ticket that describes my problem, and it gets routed to a person. But the thing is, it's highly reliable. Like I get very quick turnaround. People actually answer my question, and it's efficient, and I know that it's saving costs for my organization. So the key is making sure that it actually works and that it's, you know, and part of that is training and policies and just making clear statements to agencies. This is how you're supposed to use it. So I think that's what we'll count on.
I mean, I'm not so concerned about agencies going out and getting a portal like Portland has because those portals are very expensive. That software is very expensive, and I don't think that that's going to be the thing they're going to turn to immediately. So I think we can implement some reporting requirements that are minimally onerous and get some data. It's not going to be perfect by any stretch of the imagination. There are always ways to gain the data. I saw it when I was working on the federal level. but it will get us some data and get us closer to where we need to be. So there's a comment in the back.
So one question comes to mind. So the discussion about formal procedures through a formal policy and informal procedures. And I'm just thinking about it at the city level because, you know, and for example, our city recorder, we have an established process, it's posted online, but we also have developed relationships with people. And they can ask, like you said, you know, you get on the phone and they send information out. It doesn't necessarily have to go through the formal channel. So I guess if you're looking at agencies and maybe local governments and having an established formal procedure pursuant to state law, it's going to be a given that within each of those agencies and cities, they're still going to have an informal policy. And I guess, how do you want to put controls over that? Do you want to leave it to the discretion of each of those agencies and cities to manage that informal policy and then filter it into the formal policy when necessary? Or do you want to have some kind of overarching framework for how to deal with that informal policy? Because it seems you can make something formal, but there's always going to be an informal way of doing things. So where does the control stop and where does it start? Meaning leaving it to the discretion of the person deciding to use the informal policy. And that could also depend on if they know the person or not. I mean, it's just a given. You know, if you have a relationship with someone, they pick up the phone, you're more apt to give them something through the informal policy than putting them through the formal policy. So I'm not saying there's an answer to the question, but it seems like you're raising the issue of formal versus informal. Where do you want to stop dealing with it and leave it up to the agency to kind of make that determination, or the city make that determination? So
I feel like it's really the requester who is ultimately in control of whether they want to invoke the formal procedure, and I'm okay with that, honestly.
I am too.
And I think the purpose of the formal policy is to inform the people who don't have that personal connection of what avenues they can use to avail themselves of the public records law. But as it is 3:30, sorry, did you have?
I was just gonna say, I wouldn't want the state telling me I couldn't do informal
No, I'm sure.
reporters that I have relationships with, because
Right, that's just ridiculous.
yeah, that would be just ridiculous.
my point wasn't whether there should be a mandate, it was more, it seems like there's different ways of approaching the public records issue, and it seems like there was kind of a discussion as to how to handle each of those different.
Well, and I can see some danger there, David, if you had like two agencies and one really handled a lot of stuff informally, got UC reporters, got relationships built, and just knocked out all kinds of things that would become public records, and you have another agency that's just the opposite. They would show a whole lot of public records requests, and this one's got like none. And you say, well, what's going on? And the answer is you have to peel back the onion a few layers to figure out what is going on. I'm not saying one's better than the other, but you know, comparing apples to apples might be hard from state agency to state agency because
I agree. So it is about 3:30. It's almost August. So if we're talking about legislative proposals, we need to decide how we want to go forward. The proposal on the table is what I wrote out with the revisions that have been suggested. Briefly, the revisions are to require first that agencies report the number of requests received pursuant to their public records policy, and then the number of requests received pursuant to the agency's public records policy, which the agency has not completed, for which the agency has not completed its response within the 15 business day timeframe included in the statute. Adding in that received pursuant to language again for prong 2 of what I had originally proposed. There are some proposals on the table for prong 3 to add in the total dollar value of fees assessed in instances where the fee reduction or waiver was requested and denied. And then the fourth prong is the one dealing with exemptions. So the question is, how do we want to move forward? Do we want to move forward? Do we want to take this up again when we meet in September or October? Although, given the legislative calendar, question is, you know, what can we do moving forward?
Can't we just put a concept in that says that we'll have reporting requirements as a placeholder for right now, and then we can decide what those reporting requirements are going to be later on? For Ledge Council, can we do that right now? Is put in.
already have a placeholder in, right?
We do. We have a placeholder in. Yeah, we have a placeholder in that is for proposals of this council.
With the relating clause of state agency reporting, public reporting.
Yeah, this is limited to state agencies.
Actually, I'm hearing more consensus right now around this.
Okay, so do we want to go ahead and vote on this to move forward?
I'm a little confused about the fee.
No, we're going to include the number of requests received. I'm just making sure that people are okay with that, because that's the big addition to this proposal that I've typed out here.
So what are we measuring in the fees again? I'm just not entirely clear. Like
See, what I was trying to get to is how many requests for reduction and waiver are being denied. That's what I was trying to get to,
Yeah.
which incentivizes agencies to grant those requests for reduction and waiver. But I think others wanted more granular information there about the number of dollars that are being charged in those instances.
to what end though? I guess that's what.
All right, let's just go through this and vote on it point by point, and see if we can't get something to move forward with.
I'm sorry to interrupt the process, but, are we going through this kind of, can I introduce a different amendment?
Sure.
Because I think this is what we've been talking about. I think there's support for not merely what they did not do, but what they did do.
Yeah.
So is that also part of it?
Yeah, so that would be bumping one down, and that would be prong one. So the number of records received, number of records requests received pursuant to the agency's public records policy. So the total number of records requests received, which would give us the data, so then we have the ratio of when are they meeting the deadline, when are they not. So for that first proposal, to require annual reporting on the number of records requests received pursuant to the agency's public records policy. We want to go ahead and take a vote on whether we want to go ahead and propose that. All right, let's take a vote.
Yes.
Okay, do we have to move to that? I don't know if I can move to that.
So moved.
Okay. All right, so on that,
You need a second. Okay,
All right.
any discussion? All right, then you
How
can
did
call for
it
a vote.
all right, I'd like to go ahead and call this for a vote.
All in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you, guys. All right, so the second is the number of requests received pursuant to the agency's public records policy for which the agency has not completed its response within the 15 business day timeframe included in section 192.3295A.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All right. The number of requests received pursuant to the agency's public records policy for which the agency has not completed its response within 60 calendar days.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Now, the third one is the tricky one. I'm not sure what language people want me to include in this, so can we have just a brief discussion of that?
Having been one of the people that suggested having a total, I'd like to have it, but I'm happy to let it go, having further concerns about why it might be handicapped.
I just want to know what it is we want to get at with the numbers. Honestly, like, this isn't coming from opposition, but I just am not clear what we would be, like, what are we measuring if we ask them to list the times, not that they've granted waiver requests, but only denied, right? And then how much they've denied and collected, how much they've denied and not collected, how much they've denied and regardless of whether it was subsequent. I just don't even, like, what are we asking for? And then I also don't really understand why.
So just as a point of comparison, the FOIA requires in its annual reporting requirements, and this is sections M and N, the number of fee waiver requests that are granted and denied, and the average and median number of days for adjudicating fee waiver determinations. And then in N, the total amount of fees collected by the agency for processing requests. So
those are different.
Those are
pieces of
different.
Information,
Those are different
all of which
pieces
I'm
of
kind of
information.
interested in actually. Like I've heard people concerned that time spent weighing fee waiver requests can delay a response to public records.
I mean, what we could do is just adopt that language if
Or
others are
any part of
in
it, because that's three different sets of
Yeah.
data. Maybe we just bite off the first part of that.
number of fee waiver requests that are granted and denied.
And I imagine the legislature also wants to know how much agencies are collecting in public records fees. Like,
Do they? I think they really do.
yeah,
Well, apparently Willamette Week is interested.
Well, I can see that. I don't know the list.
I mean, they usually like to know how much money state agencies have because they have other ideas about how to spend it.
And agencies already have to account for that money they're
That's
receiving,
right.
right?
That's
So that should not be a difficulty to point to collect. Nick?
Just in the realm of unintended consequences, if you're asking agencies to track how much they are spending for public records requests, you are collecting. I still worry that some agencies, some people I've talked to in the past will, okay.
What are you gonna do with them? What's good is that information? Because unless you know how much they're spending on the public records request and how much they're collecting on the public records request, it could be a wash. So, and that's what that's what the intent of the fees is that it is a wash. That is a net zero.
Wash though, because the legislature is funding the agency, so this is income to the agency from a source other than the legislature. And the legislature may very well want to look at that and be like, well, if you're collecting this money, like why?
But it's costing you that money.
What are you doing?
Not so much on file, it's just by funds reported in your budget. You have to report the fees you collect.
So do we want to table that particular issue for further discussion next time?
I just think it's outside our purview to be collecting data from the legislature. We're here to advise public records policy. So I think we should be collecting information about this process, and I think the ledge can collect the ledge.
Okay. So we can talk more about the collection of fees issue later. It sounds like people have some strong opinions on that, and maybe that's something that we can address in the next meeting. In the meantime, do we want to include a provision for collection, for recording of the number of fee waiver requests that are granted and denied? All in favor? All opposed? Okay.
Could I make a request?
It's 20 to 4.
It is 20 to 4, and I hope that it will only take us 25 seconds. I would request that when this legislative concept is, it's already been submitted, that you ask for a revision of the relating clause relating to state agency public records reporting. Okay, and I'd love to get
Let's asterisk that, and we're gonna get on state agency definition later. But remember that that's not the state agency definition used to in the public records section.
Okay. Well, you understand what I'm attempting.
Yeah, I do.
What I am attempting. What I'm attempting to do is to make it a clean bill that will not attract a herd of unrelated issues.
Okay, I'm gonna make this more than 25 seconds then, because what if there may be additional legislative concepts that we want to entertain?
There are a few things that we were going to talk about. I don't know that we necessarily have the time to deal with that because I do need to have a conversation with you about the administrative rules or we cannot move forward on them. We have to have a conversation about potential fiscal impact.
So
by
just
law.
in terms of changing the relating clause to be narrower, I don't know whether, I mean, is that forestall our being able to do other types of legislation?
No, it just confines this particular bill. The only thing you can change in a piece of legislation is the relating to clause.
Right.
And everything has to be germane.
But we only have one bill that's pre-session filed.
There will be plenty more out there.
Yeah, because I mean, the other thing, did you get the extension of this committee? Is that part of that? Whether you're gonna try to do that as part of that bill? Because then now we're gonna get, because this committee will end in the middle of the next legislature, in the next biennium.
Then it needs to be relating to public records, which is big, which can cause all kinds of.
But then we can define what state agency is for the purposes of that part of the bill. We can define what state agency is to make it the more narrow definition.
And it is defined within the statute already because for my purposes, I'm only required to provide mediation between state agencies and requesters.
No, but don't miss Mark's point.
Right.
Because it's a relating to clause. You can define it in the state statute, but if the bill is relating to, let's just give you a broad one, a bill relating to things regulated by government. Okay, that means you can gut and stuff it with anything you can dream of. So really, if it's related to public records, you can have all kinds of people offering amendments that don't even come from us, that come from wherever, that come from wacky Google places.
You know, and your charter includes when it's agreed to by both parties, cities, even if they have a forum.
That is true. Cameron, do you want to speak to this, how we would have to tag this in order to address the concern?
So the issue is, the definition of state agency in the public record.
Wait, let's get to that in a second. I'm just asking the question of how do we address Mark's concern here?
Oh, how do we?
Is there a way that we can address this and still address the extension of the committee within legislation?
And then the other.
No.
You can't have an and in the relating to clause, so no.
You would need a separate bill. So, I mean, the choice is.
Make a broad bill and stuff.
Make a broad bill and jam everything in there, but that creates a whole set of new problems that may result in your bill not getting to the end of the process.
So can we do two separate bills?
Well, that's a predetermined issue whereby you've already missed your deadline.
Or you have friends who are legislators who are going to drop bills for you.
Right.
And you happen to have a member who.
You have two. You have two legislative members, so you.
That's right,
Yes, we have.
You're going to need to get them to sponsor a bill to continue the process. That's the one that I would worry about is get them to sponsor a bill to continue the process.
Correct.
Until through indefinitely or however long you want to do it. And then this one, you narrow up the relating clause so it doesn't get gotten stuck at the end of session, because it will.
That would be what I would recommend, that the process by which we proceed, at least with those two legislative concepts, is having a member of the committee who happens to be a legislator extend this committee and narrow the relating to clause on what we're talking about for record reporting.
So we'll do that. That is the plan going forward if people are okay with that.
You can also, the governor and the secretary of state both can introduce bills, correct? Or are they limited? I can't remember.
And it could also be, I seem to recall that when I talked with our folks about the legislative concepts, that one of the concepts that we proposed specifically was to extend the PRAC. So I can't pull my email up right now because I'm sharing my screen, but I do believe that that's something that we carved out specifically. So I will double check on that, and I will ensure that your concerns about this are weighed. In the interest of time, and because I absolutely have to have a discussion with you about the fiscal impact of these administrative rules, let's just move forward and finish this up. So the final proposal is a complete list of all the statutes, regulations, or administrative rules that the agency relies upon to authorize the agency to withhold information and the number of occasions on which each statute was relied upon.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? All opposed?
Oh, no,
You're not opposed, or you are opposed?
I am
opposed. Okay,
no.
so one opposed.
No,
Just be proper.
I don't know that I like this either. I'm going to say no.
Okay, so two opposed?
I mean, it would be useful for some purposes, but this actually looks like a lot of work to me.
Some agency, well, they just have to identify the exemptions. I think that's what they're asking.
Identify the exemption and how many times they've used it.
How many individual usages, how many requests, how many, I mean, there's a lot of.
Yeah.
Ways of how many.
So maybe we table this one. This sounds more complicated, and it's something that we didn't discuss so much today.
Yeah.
So let's table this for discussion later. Are people okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so Cameron, do you think that you can cover the state agency question in like 5 to 10 minutes?
I can do it like that.
Okay. So this is the concern that Cameron had raised with me. It's potential. I asked the question, and then it turns out that I opened up a big box full of questions. So I'd like to address this here. This is a potential legislative fix that we would need to ask for. Cameron, I'll let you can come up and sit at the table so they can hear you a little better on the phone.
The facilitated dispute resolution services for the public records advocate say a person may seek facilitated dispute resolution services under this section when seeking to inspect or receive copies of public records from a state agency and the person. Public records section defines a state agency as any state officer, department, board, commission, or court created by the Constitution or statutes of this state, but does not include the Legislative Assembly or its members, committees, officers, or employees, insofar as they are exempt under Section 9, Article 4 of the Oregon Constitution. Section 9, Article 4 of the Constitution says that the Legislative Assembly is not subject to civil process while they're in session, which means you can't sue the legislator while they're in session. But by excluding them insofar as they're exempt when they're in session, the court is likely to find that it includes the Legislative Assembly. So basically judges, legislators, everyone is included as a state agency if you're a state, any kind of state body, and it doesn't mean just state agencies, what we think of as state agencies.
Like, give me an example of what you think it includes that we wouldn't think it includes.
Like Senator Thatcher, who was sitting in this chair previously, is a state agency.
Why would
Her and her staff is a state agency.
Why wouldn't she be?
Well, because normally people think of a state agency as only executive branch agencies.
Oh, I see.
Is this only in relationship to?
This is the entire public records section.
So the question is, do we want mediation services provided to the legislative branch and the judicial branch, or only the executive branch?
Yes. But even the proposal that we had before us says the reporting requirements, I mean, every single senator and member would have to report on their public records request. Every judge, every court, everyone would
Mean
report.
that your office couldn't compile for all 60
It
of
would
them?
not mean that.
So that would go 90, but 90, yeah.
Plus the other committees, because each committee is a separate, so it'd be there's like 120.
Now the truth comes out.
It's the court, it applies to a lot of people that people don't think of when they mean state agency. And I don't even know.
The sheriff and the district attorney would be a state officer, wouldn't they?
Well, no, the sheriff is not. A district attorney, the elected official, is a state official, but nobody that works for the DA is a state.
But then that makes him a state agency.
Under the statute, state agency means any state office or department, board, or commission created by the Constitution or statutes of the state. Then it says does not include legislative assembly or its committees, officers, and employees. How does that factor into?
That's during session.
Okay.
Only in session, it doesn't include them in session. So technically they're a state agency in the interim, and then during session, they're no longer a state agency for public records requests.
I am stunned that OJD did not come after us when we had a definition that included that. That's
So-
surprising to me.
But just to be clear, what you're suggesting is that we change the scope of Ginger's authority to do, like, nobody's suggesting we should exclude the legislature or the judiciary from the public record. Because
I'm not suggesting anything. The question was, can Ginger do dispute resolution for members of the legislature? And the answer is most likely yes.
Out of session.
Out of session, as long as the request to mediate is out of session. But that was not necessarily what her thought was on the front.
legislators are mandated actually to participate because
Mandated to
it's
participate.
not voluntary.
And it sounds like judges too.
Yeah.
I
Well,
think
it's not just judges, it's for court created by the Constitution.
Well, I think.
Well, and there might be a difference there if it's created by the Constitution or statute.
So
Yeah, I don't
what-
want to go in
The
that.
judicial department was created by the Constitution.
What's the practical thing?
I mean, I just wanted to
At the end
raise
of the day,
this
what, I mean,
issue because this is something that was unanticipated to me, and I thought it was something that we should discuss. Although, looking at the time, I think this is something that we're going to have to wait to discuss more at length during our next meeting. But I wanted, while Cameron was here, for him to discuss.
Again, looking at the practical implication is, under his reading, you would not be allowed to invoke mediation.
No,
During
session.
During
During
session.
session, yeah, that's what I mean, right, okay.
I mean, that is going to create a very real conflict of interest for me if I'm lobbying to the legislature on a particular legislative proposal at the same time that there's some mediation going on. I mean, that
That
creates.
seems like a really bad idea.
I want
I'm not proposing anything, I'm.
I think this is something I wanted to raise this issue so you all are aware of it and thinking about it for our next meeting, but we do not have time to deal with this right now. I have to get to the administrative rules. So legally, I'd like us to turn to that now. I am required to have a conversation with you about these administrative rules where we can go forward. That conversation is about the potential fiscal impact of the administrative rules. I don't believe there is one, but I have to raise this issue and hear your feedback on it in order to comply with the law. So if folks have thoughts about that, I would be happy to hear them. I did not make very many changes to this other than the ones that were proposed and discussed in the last meeting. The only two major changes that I made, which are not even major, was to limit to one mediation at a time, and that's because there is an individual who is well known to us here in the state government, who is demanding that I do several mediations for him with various state agencies that actually, in fact, have restraining orders against him. And I think just for the ensuring that my office's resources are not devoted to just one person who has an axe to grind, I would like to limit it to one mediation at a time. And then an acknowledgement.
It sounds to me like you're going to be working for years with this individual.
Potentially, yeah, unless we end up.
And do we need to do something, do we need to do something about that as well, is a question.
So the other is an acknowledgement that a bad faith finding will not be confidential under the law. I mean, that is the very purpose of the bad faith finding.
Now, your requirement is to ensure that you share with us the fiscal impacts of both local, state government as well as business, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you've, just to ensure that we're ringing the bell here, have you reached out to any business interests to see whether or not they see any fiscal impact?
If you have a list of suggested business interests that I would
don't want to slow
to.
down the process.
You don't have to, because this is a diverse group and it's not all government people, there are members of the private sector here and that are members of the council. This can serve as the Rules Advisory Committee, and you, from your practical experience in the private sector, would this have a fiscal impact, or can you foresee a fiscal impact on a business, an Oregon business, or an individual? It's very loosely written as far as fiscal impact.
I'm speaking for all the business community. Yeah, I'm seeing it.
I mean, if we were charging, I mean, a lot of, there's really no fees being charged in here.
And this is a procedural thing.
Right.
We still have to take this
Right.
next door, get it drafted into OAR form, publish it, take public
Right.
comments, do the whole.
But so we can initiate that. I have to be able to check box.
I can't imagine any fiscal impact. You do have one site of the old public records statute study.
Okay, so let's talk about that offline and just point it out to me and I will fix it.
Do you need a motion?
Real quick though, I also included in here, I have to have a notice rule, which is what's on the top of page 2. Notice to interested persons in rulemaking. These are the people that I have to reach out to when I publish this rule, or beforehand. So I have a list there. If anyone has any additional suggestions, this does include news media, it includes the typical requirements to notify the legislature, et cetera. Otherwise, if we can just get a motion.
I move so moved.
Second.
All right, all in favor? All opposed? Thank you all. Now I can move forward with this administrative rule. We have a few things that we'll discuss next time that we're kind of sticking to the next meeting. We had talked about that meeting being in September. I will say that for me, September is quite busy because there are a lot of conferences that are happening. So I think probably very early in October would be a more realistic timeline for me in this office. So we'll go ahead and move forward with that, and I will send out notifications shortly of when that meeting will be.
We don't have a meeting ours is September, right, Michael?
Yeah, it's September and then November, I believe.
Correct.
So, all right, if that's it, then I think meeting is adjourned. Do we need a motion for that?
Technically, yes, so moved.
Second.
All right, all in favor? Aye. All opposed? We'll wrap up by 2:19. I am gonna call that. Yeah, that's actually. No, that's not good.
I know.
Good to see you last time. But it may result in shading. I mean, and I can give you the language, because yeah, that would be helpful. When we do the city schedule, county schedule, that sort of thing. That is going to stop the recording.
Don't forget to turn your phone off.
Oh, yeah, hang up the phone. So I'm trying to figure out how to stop it.